Chapter 271. A burst of deafening cheers sounded in the Human Alliance army, directly revealing the identity of the blue-armored knight, Your Highness. The supervisor Nicholas standing on the city wall was just a fake substitute. The real Prince Nicholas had personally led an army to attack the unfinished camp flank of the vanguard when the elite wolf riders and troll headhunters of the vanguard appeared on the main battlefield. A group of panicked half-orc laborers in front of him could not stop Nicholas from moving forward. He raised his heavy hammer, and the blazing light condensed into an illusory sledgehammer, hammering forward. Prince Nicholas of the Gorse Empire's skill, Heaven's Hammer, has been launched. At the same time, Bai Xiaowen received the prompt. With a loud bang, the arrow towers that were still under construction collapsed one after another, and the laborers who could not dodge in time were directly shaken into meat patties. The scope of this hammer was dozens of meters in radius, and the ground sank half a foot, which was enough to show the terrifying power. This hammer had also opened up a wide path for the cavalry to charge forward. Amidst the waves of shouts of "Long live His Highness," Prince Nicholas's warhorse directly stepped into the camp of the remnants. The 9 infantry phalanxes of the 3 lines of defense were infected by Prince Nicholas's bravery, and their morale was greatly boosted, and they shouted and launched a countercharge. However, Bai Xiaowen found that the troll headhunters and wolf cavalry who rushed out of the camp did not have any panic on their faces, and they were still fighting bravely without the slightest chaos. In the next moment, Bai Xiaowen knew the reason. Impassioned drums sounded in the camp of the remnants. The camp of the remnants, which was originally only occupied by groups of laborers, was now full of fluttering banners. Bai Xiaowen and others could not see the situation in the camp because their vision was blocked, but they could see that the powerful cavalry of the Empire was forced to retreat step by step. "What's going on?" Li Shi asked in surprise. It seems that the commander of the remnants vanguard saw through the tactics of the Human Alliance army and hid a group of elite troops in the unfinished camp. It seems that this group of elite troops is very strong to be able to force Prince Nicholas to retreat. Bai Xiaowen didn't use insight to check Prince Nicholas' stats. However, the template of a rare boss was unavoidable. Even if he was not yet a Lord-class powerhouse, he had the potential to be one in the future. In addition to Nicholas's noble status, his equipment must be extraordinarily luxurious. People like Nicholas had always been the favorite target of powerful awakened ones because there was a small chance of him dropping dark gold equipment. Of course, such a goal was far more difficult than an ordinary leader's, and the benefits and risks were proportionately higher. Thump, thump, the earth was shaking. Suddenly, a huge beast's head popped out from the abandoned camp, followed by the full appearance of the huge beast. This was an enlarged version of the lizard. It was more than 10 meters long and 4 meters tall. Its entire body was wrapped in hard stone armor. Its back was dark yellow, and its abdomen was light yellow. Behind the lizard sat a tall orc. His body was wrapped in a simple animal skin, and his white hair was braided. He seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life. Bai Xiaowen used insight from afar. Kale Man Bromfield, leader level 7, race, humanoid/orc, profession, giant hammer berserker, attributes, strength 70, agility 30, constitution 42, spirit 21, skills, warlord's fortitude, passive, level 1, skull splitter, inspire. This old orc named Kale Man was so strong that it gave Bai Xiaowen a big fright. Level 7 leader. It was the same level as the leader of the honorable knights in the Aran world, Gloria. Their overall attributes were about the same. However, Gloria's attributes were mainly constitution, while Kale Man was a strength-type boss with a strength value as high as 70 points. Moreover, the passive skill, Warlord's Fortitude, was level 1, but it increased the immunity to abnormal states by 30%, and also increased the HP by 300 points. This kind of passive skill that increased the HP was generally available to elites and leaders above level 7. Level 4, Level 7, and Level 10 were 3 special numbers, not only for awakened ones, but also for spiritual realm powerhouses. Although a Level 4 elite and chieftain did not have any additional HP, all of their attributes were significantly higher than when they were Level 3. At Level 7, not only did all their attributes increase, their HP had almost doubled. When Bai Xiaowen and Gloria first entered the Cane world and killed Ian, the leader of the Black Wind Bandits, the two level 7 elites under him had additional HP, so even if they were strength-type elites, their HP was still very high. Bai Xiaowen spent a lot of effort to kill them. This orc warlord Kale Man's original weakness was that he only had around 40 points of constitution, and it was easy for him to be instantly killed. However, with the additional 300 points of HP, his HP had almost doubled, and it was different, not to mention the 30% immunity to control. The giant lizard that Kale Man rode was also not easy to deal with. It was a level 6 leader creature, and its passive skill, Petrified Skin, had extremely high defense, and it also had a powerful single-point control skill, Petrified Stare. Together with the high-output Violent Berserker Kale Man, it was really terrifying. However, although Kale Man was strong, he was only one person, and it was impossible for him to scare off Prince Nicholas. What really made Nicholas retreat were the 3 elite troops behind Kale Man. Wolf Riders, Troll Headhunters, and a group of War Lizard Riders, all elite professions, under the leadership of Kale Man and several leaders of the survivors, launched a counterattack against Nicholas' cavalry. This was the real main force of the vanguard army of the survivors. The ones that had just fought against the 3 lines of defense were just a small part of it. Li Shi exclaimed, "That old orc. I didn't expect him to have such wisdom, showing weakness to the enemy. Now Prince Nicholas is in danger. Xiaowen, what should we do now?" Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and said, "Pass down my order, the 3 infantry phalanxes of the 3rd line of defense, detour from the main battlefield and march under my banner." Li Shi didn't understand, but the messenger faithfully carried out Bai Xiaowen's order and rode his horse to inform the other 2 infantry phalanxes, Lord Julian and Lord Cecilia. Chapter 272. Bai Xiaowen had not gone far when he heard the sound of horse hooves. Lord Cecilia of the White Rose was riding a tall white horse, her white cloak fluttering in the wind. She caught up with Bai Xiaowen all the way. "Dior, what do you mean?" Cecilia said coldly. "His Royal Highness is trapped and the situation is critical. Why don't you go to rescue him? You ordered the 3rd line of defense to take a detour. Do you want to retreat? My order is based on the judgment of the battlefield situation." Bai Xiaowen thought for a moment and decided to make it clear to Cecilia. "Do you think the vanguard army of the remnants can really defeat Prince Nicholas?" Cecilia frowned. Bai Xiaowen explained, "Now, the main force of the remnants has not arrived yet. If even a vanguard army can defeat the most elite imperial army of the Blackrock Fortress, there is no need to fight this war. Based on my judgment, His Royal Highness must have hidden a backup plan. The vanguard army of the remnants will be defeated in this war." After a pause, Bai Xiaowen said again, "So, now we have to take a detour to the enemy's rear, ambush them in the dangerous terrain, and cut off their way back. When they are defeated and flee to the north, we will wipe them all out in one battle." Bai Xiaowen still had something that he didn't say. The second main task, War of the Blackrock Fortress, required them to defend the Blackrock Fortress for 10 days. The strength of the Whitestone army under Bai Xiaowen's command was only a few tenths of the whole war situation, and this was only in terms of numbers. In terms of strength, the ratio would be reduced to less than 1%. In other words, the Whitestone army's influence on the whole general trend was very weak. This implied that the Human Alliance army of the Blackrock Fortress had a certain strength and could hold on for at least a few days under the attack of the main force of the remnants. If even the vanguard army could not defeat them and was defeated at the first touch, even if Bai Xiaowen was 2 levels higher, he could not reverse the general trend. The rules of the spiritual realm would not create tasks that could not be completed. Of course, this was outside information, and Bai Xiaowen could not say it clearly. Cecilia said coldly, "I don't agree with your judgment. I only believe in my own eyes." This was the result of the information imbalance. Although Bai Xiaowen believed in his judgment, he could not convince Cecilia. Of course, this also had something to do with Bai Xiaowen's low reputation in the Human Alliance army. If he had a reputation of reverence or even worship, Cecilia would have to weigh the weight of his words. As the commander of the 3rd Defense Line, I order the 19th Infantry Formation to follow my orders and move forward. Bai Xiaowen said in a deep voice. Madam Cecilia, please carry out the order. Cecilia snorted again and held back her harsh words. I only listened to the prince's orders. His last order was, to charge. Lord Julian followed them on his horse and said, don't be impulsive. We're all well-educated nobles. Let's talk nicely. However, Cecilia looked down on Lord Julian. She turned her horse around and left without any intention of continuing the conversation. Brother, I heard what you just said. Lord Julian laughed. I have to admit that what you said makes some sense, but it's contrary to the prince's order. I think we should be more careful, right? We don't want to be meritorious, but we don't want to be wrong. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. The opportunity is fleeting. How can we wait for military orders? If you don't want to go, then stay. Let's go. Hey, wait a minute. Lord Julian stopped Bai Xiaowen. Young people are impatient. How about this? I'll give you the most elite cavalry unit under my command. These are my direct guards. There are a total of 20 of them, but they're all elites. Instead of fighting with those bumpkin recruits on the battlefield, it's better to send your men to retreat with you. You'll be able to survive. Don't you want to kill your men as soon as possible so that you can return to Black Rock City? Hey, I'm talking about the newly recruited pariahs. Those guys whose legs turn to jelly when they hear the drums. They're just wasting their food. These 20 cavalrymen are different. They're my babies. Lord Julian said. I'll emphasize again. I'm going to the enemy's rear, not retreat, Bai Xiaowen said. Your precious cavalrymen may suffer losses. If we're unlucky, they may all be wiped out. Ha ha, I know. You're going to take a detour, not retreat. Lord Julian laughed. Well, if you're right, you'll be able to intercept the escape route of the vanguard of the remnant army. That'll be a great achievement. It'll be worth it even if my cavalrymen die. Bai Xiaowen was a little awestruck. Lord Julian muttered again, I'll also be able to get some merit points. It'll be more dignified when I return to Black Rock City. With the 20 cavalrymen under Lord Julian's command, Bai Xiaowen ordered the whole army to take a detour and leave the battlefield from the side. According to his memory of the topographic map of the northern frontier, he quickly selected a strategic terrain called Black Iron Gorge, 50 miles north of Black Rock City. The battle in front of Black Rock City was still fierce. Prince Nicholas was in trouble, which made the 9 lords of the northern frontier, there were 8 left now, very anxious. If anything happened to Prince Nicholas, how would they explain it to the Gorse Empire? By then, there would be no way out. Therefore, even though the remnant elites were powerful, the human Northern Frontier Alliance army still pushed forward with a lot of losses. The troll headhunters and half-orc spearmen who were fighting with the human Northern Frontier Alliance army also did their best to resist the enemy's advance under the command of Kale Man, the commander of the vanguard army. They did not give the human Northern Frontier Alliance army any chance to rescue Prince Nicholas. Cecilia was really angry. She ordered the archers to shoot indiscriminately. The rain of arrows reaped the lives of both the enemy and her soldiers at the same time. As for herself, she led dozens of white-armored knights and charged forward in an arrow formation. At the beginning, the cavalry charged with irresistible force. However, in the blink of an eye, the commander of the vanguard army, Kale Man, sent out a group of stone lizard knights to stop Cecilia's charge. The gargoyle lizard knights had powerful defensive capabilities. They were like a thick and heavy city wall in front of them, preventing them from breaking through. Without the advantage of speed, Cecilia's cavalry was surrounded by the troll headhunters. A few of them were pulled off their horses. Cecilia waved her bow and killed a troll headhunter. A hurricane of arrows cleared the path behind her. It was not easy for her to lead the army out of the encirclement. She looked back at the white-armored knights around her and found that there were less than 10 of them. Cecilia's heart was bleeding, but she gritted her teeth and said, "Continue to charge." Julian, who was beside her, advised, "Forget it. Those barbarians riding stone lizards are as hard as stones in a cesspool. It's impossible for a ragtag army like us to charge through." Indeed, it was not only Cecilia who was hindered. The other troops of the Northern Frontier Alliance army also stopped advancing and were entangled with the enemy's stone lizard knights. Cecilia was not a fool. She did not give the order to continue charging. Instead, she drew her bow and began to take advantage of a long-range leader. Arrow after arrow, she reaped the lives of the elite soldiers of the allied forces of the remnant army. Obviously, the soldiers under her command were more familiar with this strategy. Dozens of white-armored knights surrounded her. Some skilled archers in the inner circle also began to shoot, while the heavy-armored knights surrounded and protected her from the outer circle. The infantrymen and archers around her, according to Cecilia's order, launched projectile shots at the stone lizard knights, who were the biggest target. Although the damage of a single shot was limited, the number of arrows was too much for these elite lizard knights, who had amazing defensive power, to bear. However, Cecilia and Julian still looked at the enemy camp with eyes full of worry. The enemy did not care about the casualties on the main battlefield. Instead, they concentrated the main force of elites and leaders on the flank to attack Prince Nicholas. Obviously, they treated Nicholas as a big fish. As long as they could capture and kill Nicholas, even if all of them died on the main battlefield, they would still make a big profit. Because the allied forces of the remnant army only had a small number of troops on the main battlefield. At this moment, behind Nicholas, a yellow flag suddenly rose and waved in the wind. Then, in the direction of Black Rock City, a terrible energy fluctuation came. The earth was roaring and shaking, and the sky was covered with dark clouds. A figure in a red robe slowly flew into the sky. The red bishop robe on his body fluttered as if it was inflated. Streaks of dazzling light shot out from below and gathered on his body, illuminating him like a man made of light. Such a dazzling light and shadow effect played an 82 points role in showing off. Both sides of the battle, whether it was the remnants or the human coalition forces, stopped and stared at the figure of light that rose into the sky, dumbfounded. From the dazzling light, it could be vaguely seen that this was a tall old man. He held a glowing code in his left hand and read aloud. His voice was like a great bell, and the whole battlefield could hear it clearly. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth. The earth was void and chaos, and the abyss was dark. God's Spirit moved on the surface of the water, and God said, "Let there be light." So there was light. Along with the reading, the old man in the red robe lifted his hand with difficulty, as if he was carrying a heavy object, and slowly rose inch by inch. God saw that light was good, so he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. There is night, and there is morning. This is the first day. When the last word was spoken, the old man in the red robe pointed to the highest point above his head. Dark clouds covered the sky. Suddenly, it was as if a sharp sword had pierced through the clouds. Sunlight poured down in torrents, directly covering the abandoned camp. The stone lizard riders, wolf riders, half-orc spearmen, troll headhunters, and even the leader of the vanguard army were all shrouded in the light. In an instant, countless screams sounded. This holy light shone on the remnant army, but it was like a torture in a pan of oil. Every second, their HP was dropping rapidly. When the light fell on the soldiers of the Human Alliance army, it was soft and warm. Not only were their HP slowly recovering, but even their wounds were slowly healing. After a few seconds, the light dissipated, and the dark clouds in the sky disappeared without a trace. The old man in the red robe, who was shrouded in the light, fell into the city powerlessly. However, the situation of the battlefield had completely changed. The Human Alliance army's HP was full, and their morale was high. They roared and launched a charge. In the vanguard army, all the ordinary soldiers, such as half-orc laborers, were directly purified by the light. As for those elite soldiers, even if they survived, they were all injured. In serious cases, their HP was even less than half, and all their attributes were reduced by half. Withdraw! The commander of the vanguard army, Kale Man, roared at the top of his lungs. As an old beast man who had been through hundreds of battles, he knew very well that fleeing was not a shameful thing. As long as he could preserve the spark of these elite soldiers, they could still make a comeback when they met up with the main force. Dong dong dong. Kale Man beat the war drum and launched another leader skill, Encourage. The attack speed of the whole army increased by 15%, and the movement speed increased by 30%. Of course, he launched this skill in the hope of retreating faster. There was no counterattack. The impassioned horn sounded, and Prince Nicholas smashed the head of a giant lizard rider with a heavy hammer. He ordered the whole army to charge and pursue the remnant army in order to maximize the results of the battle. Charge, justice will prevail. Praise the Holy Light. Long live the Holy Light. The lords of the Northern Frontier Alliance army, one by one, led the army to follow Prince Nicholas' footsteps and rushed forward. Oh, that guy was right. Lord Julian slapped his thigh and ordered his infantry to charge. He turned back to look for Cecilia. What are you waiting for? Hurry up, don't let those barbarians escape. Cecilia frowned slightly and pointed her bow and arrow. The white-armored cavalry led the way, and many archers rushed forward. However, Cecilia herself was somewhat dispirited. For a moment, she still could not believe this fact and was stunned for a long time. That young boy really guessed it right? Lord Julian did not charge with the army. He valued his own life very much, so he stayed where he was and said, yes, he guessed it right. Now there's a good show to watch. I hope he can come back alive. The group of barbarians retreated very decisively, and many elites escaped. With the speed of the Imperial army, I'm afraid they can't catch up with them. Cecilia quickly understood. Yes, although he correctly judged the direction of the battle and set up an ambush in advance, but whether he can defeat the remnant army depends on whether he has the strength to do so. Is it too late for us to reinforce them now? Lord Julian shook his head. Let's report to His Highness first. Prince Nicholas' blue armor was bathed in blood. His originally handsome face had a layer of fierceness, but most of it was the blood of the enemy. Chase, chase! Kill them all! Chapter 273. What? Baron Dior led the army alone and set up an ambush in advance? Prince Nicholas was taken aback. He thought for a moment and said, many elites of the allied forces of the remnants have escaped, and their leader, Kale Man, is still powerful. It's too rash for Baron Dior to ambush Kale Man with only a few hundred men. Julian said, yes, I also tried to persuade him. Prince Nicholas added, however, this is indeed a genius idea. When I was formulating the battle plan, I only wanted to defeat the vanguard and give them a show of strength, but I didn't consider setting up an ambush and annihilating them in advance. Baron Dior is a military genius. Julian wiped his sweat and said, yes, in fact, I also believe in his judgment and gave him the command of the most elite cavalry. Why didn't you go with him? Prince Nicholas asked. Julian hurriedly said, we were worried about the safety of your highness. In the middle of the battle, Prince Nicholas didn't ask much. He just nodded slightly and then continued to charge. Originally, Nicholas only planned to chase for a dozen miles and then stop and return to the Black Rock Fortress to set up defenses. Now he changed his mind and wanted to chase all the way. Even if he arrived at the battlefield half an hour later, he could still play a role in supporting Bai Xiaowen. Julian, who was following behind Prince Nicholas's horse, whispered, Dior is going to be rich. Cecilia's expression had returned to its original indifference. He has to survive first. After that, she squeezed the horse's belly and rushed out like a sharp arrow. Black Iron Gorge. Bai Xiaowen actually only had about an hour's worth of time to take the lead. That was to say, he had set off an hour earlier than the allied forces of the remnants. Taking into account the speed advantage of the allied forces of the remnants, this 1 hour's time was reduced by half. There was not much that could be done in just half an hour. Fortunately, the terrain of the Black Iron Gorge was dangerous and was a natural ambush site. Bai Xiaowen ordered his soldiers to start digging stones from the middle of the valley, making the second half of the dangerous path in the valley a pit on the left and a ditch on the right. There was also a group of soldiers cutting down trees and transporting them to the northern exit of the valley, piling them up and pouring oil over them. As for the extra stones, apart from some of them being used as roadblocks, the rest were transported to both sides of the mountain ridge. "They're here! Sir Lord, they're here!" Harvey, who was keeping watch in the distance, shouted. Bai Xiaowen, who was instructing the soldiers to sprinkle grease on the withered grass on the ground, nodded. "Everyone, go up the mountain. The veterans are in the first half of the valley entrance, and the new recruits are in the second half. Go!" There were about 200 to 300 veterans. Other than a portion of the elite soldiers, most of the rest were normal soldiers that were level 4 and above. They still had a certain amount of combat power. These people were also what Bai Xiaowen relied on to deal with the remnants of the allied forces. As for the recruits, they were relatively weak. If they were to face the elite soldiers of the remnant head-on, they would be defeated within a few rounds. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen arranged for them to be on both sides of the Black Iron Gorge as support. A few minutes later, the sound of chaotic footsteps could be heard. Several wolf riders with obvious burns on their bodies were in the front, followed by troll headhunters and giant lizard riders. All of them were in a mess and scrambled to run into the gorge. Good, God is really helping me. Bai Xiaowen used his insight skill to look at several wounded soldiers. These elite survivors all had a negative status that reduced all their attributes by half. He didn't know what kind of backup plan Nicholas had used to reverse the situation of the battle. The commander of the vanguard, the giant hammer berserker Kale Man, rode on a giant lizard at the back. Several leaders of the remnant who had followed him had disappeared. They were either dead or lost in the chaos. However, only the elites had the negative status of all attributes reduced by half. As the leader, Kale Man was basically intact, and his attributes were not reduced. Bai Xiaowen sighed. If Kale Man was also affected by the debuff of all attributes, this battle would be much easier to fight. However, misfortune was a blessing in disguise. If he could kill Kale Man in good condition, the battle score should be much higher. After all, he was a senior leader. Soon, several people in front of the defeated soldiers ran to the middle of the destroyed gorge and found the abnormality. Usually, this abnormality would be reported to Kale Man within 10 breaths. But now, the vanguard of the remnant was in chaos. By the time they found the abnormality by word of mouth, Kale Man had already reached the middle of the gorge. Seeing the holes of different depths dug in the ground, Kale Man's face was a little dignified. He jumped off his mount, his nose twitched, and soon smelled a trace of grease. Kale Man squatted down and touched the withered grass on the ground. His face changed, and he stood up abruptly. He shouted 3 classic words that had been said by many generals and would be said by more generals in the future. "There's an ambush." The red flag on a white background was unfurled, and 2 rows of human soldiers suddenly stood up on both sides of the gorge. They shouted and threw torches and stones down. Some soldiers who were good at archery shot fire arrows. With a bang, the flames fell on the withered grass and burned fiercely. It was worth mentioning that the grease was the material that Bai Xiaowen had plundered in Red Leaf territory through the Plague Bane industry. The residents of Red Leaf City had encountered such a temporary manager. They did not know whether they were lucky or unlucky. At least for the next few months, they could only live a miserable life with cornbread in their hands and not a drop of oil in their dishes, if there were any dishes left. The taste of being burned by the flames was not good, not to mention the stones that were falling like raindrops. Many defeated soldiers rushed to the north exit regardless of the consequences. "Warlord, the exit of the gorge is not far ahead. Let's rush in too." Several orc guards around Kale Man shouted in the remnant language. "We can't rush in. Since the enemy has set up an ambush, the road ahead must be blocked. Let's go back. The rear army will become the front army and rush out from the south exit." Kale Man shouted. Go and pass on my order. Warlord, in the current situation, we can't pass on the order. An orc guard said helplessly. The remnant people who had just been defeated and burned by the mountain fire were running around like headless flies in the billowing black smoke. How could they regroup and counterattack? Kaleman sighed. This is my mistake. I didn't expect that in this remote border, the humans would actually set up a great wizard who can use forbidden spells. Your injuries won't recover in a short time. The orc guards were panic-stricken and at a loss. Fortunately, Warlord, you have the treasure bestowed by the great shaman and temporarily healed your injuries. As long as you're here, we have hope. An orc guard clearly saw Kaleman as a life-saving straw. Chapter 274. In the midst of the chaos, there were less than 100 survivors who could still obey Kaleman's orders and finally gathered together. On the way back to the entrance of the southern valley while braving the flames and stones, the survivors, who were already injured and mostly half-dead, were further reduced. The other survivors, who did not hear Kaleman's orders, or after hearing them, they thought that rushing south was a dead end. When they rushed to the entrance of the northern valley, it was too late for regrets. In front of them were piles of trees that had been ignited by kerosene, and the fire was raging. In addition, on both sides of the steep cliffs, there were soldiers of the Whitestone army who were throwing stones and shooting arrows. It was harder than ascending to heaven to rush out. In the end, the people who rushed out of the southern valley, including Kaleman and his orc guards, were only about 60 people. Shouts sounded, and 200 carefully selected veterans of the Whitestone army followed by Xiaowen and rushed out, blocking in front of Kaleman. I've been waiting here for a long time. Bai Xiaowen wanted to say this, but considering that it was not suitable for the style of speech in Kane's Bitwall, he could only suppress it and change the line, surrender, or die. As soon as the words came out, Bai Xiaowen remembered that there seemed to be a language barrier between the two sides. The survivors did not speak the ancient Latin of the Plantagenet Empire. However, Bai Xiaowen underestimated Kaleman. This old orc was a bilingual talent. Not only could he speak the language of the survivors, but he also knew a little about ancient Latin. Kaleman grinned with his yellow teeth and said coldly, I didn't expect an ambush here. Humans are good at playing tricks. However, you weak humans want me to surrender? Stop dreaming. Charge. Kill these humans. When rushing out of the valley, Kaleman had already activated the Encourage skill to increase his movement speed. Now, taking advantage of the remaining 10 seconds of the skill's effect, it was the best choice to attack directly. Charge. Crush their bones. Orcs will never be slaves. Under the leadership of Kaleman's orc guards, the remaining elite warriors of the survivors launched a charge. Although we can communicate, the negotiations have broken down. Go! Bai Xiaowen waved his hand, and the newly promoted Knight Keats brandished his greatsword. The veterans of the Whitestone army also went to meet the remnant army. The two sides crashed into each other like two waves. It had to be said that the fighting power of the survivors was really amazing. Under the serious negative status of all attributes being reduced by half, relying on the 15% attack speed bonus and 30% movement speed bonus of Encourage, they were still able to contend with the veterans of the Whitestone army and gain a certain advantage. One had to know that this was a wounded and exhausted army. If they were in a good state, the Whitestone army could only rely on this motley crew to fight a head-on battle with the elite troops of the survivors. The result could be imagined. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and summoned all the other creatures except for the 4 skeleton swordsmen to join the battle. Seeing that there were only 10 seconds left of the enemy's Encourage, he immediately used his deterrence skill. Kaleman and his giant lizard fell into a state of fear. The soldiers under his command were all stunned. The shortest was 3 seconds and the longest was 5 seconds. Deterrence, LV4 Effect Crush. Enemies with less than 30% of Bai Xiaowen's spirit attribute will be changed from fear to stunned. Bai Xiaowen's spirit was 34 points, which meant that enemies with less than 11 points of spirit would be stunned. Originally, with the strength of Kaleman's elite warriors, they would not be stunned. However, they had the negative status of all attributes being reduced by half, so they were all stunned. Bai Xiaowen's voice sounded in the ears of every veteran captain through the spiritual connection. Don't touch Kale Man, kill the others first. Keats and the other elite veterans understood tacitly and waved their greatswords and spears, stabbing at the enemies who were stunned. Kale Man himself was in a state of fear and could only watch as his subordinates were cut down. Fortunately, with the passive warlord's perseverance, he was immune to 30% of the control effects, allowing Kale Man to regain consciousness in a short 3 seconds. Damn human magus, I will crush you. Kale Man roared and pulled out a large bone mallet from the back of his giant lizard. The bone mallet had an aura of vicissitudes. It was unknown what kind of giant beast's leg bone it was made of, but it was still stained with dark red blood. Asterisk boom. Asterisk Kale Man's mallet smashed into the ground, creating a huge shockwave that even caused cracks to appear on the ground. Several veterans of the Whitestone Army who were in the range of the shockwave were sent flying into the air, spitting out mouthfuls of blood and losing a large chunk of their HP. This was one of Kale Man's skills that had not been detected, earth-rending slam. Immediately after, Kale Man raised his mallet high up, like a baseball, and smashed the Whitestone veterans in the air. Due to the excessive force, they were not sent flying. Instead, they turned into a layer of flesh and blood that stuck to the mallet. Blood dripped down the bone mallet, and the veterans of the Whitestone Army were a little frightened. If they were new recruits, they would probably run away directly. In the distance, the skeleton mage shot a lightning throw, aiming directly at Kale Man. This lightning throw was only used to harass, to interrupt Kale Man's close combat actions. However, Kale Man did not care at all. The bone mallet smashed down again, smashing another Whitestone soldier into a meat patty. As for the lightning throw, it was scattered by the commander-level giant lizard mount he was riding on. It raised its head and scattered it. The head of the giant lizard, which was wrapped in thick stone armor, only emitted a trace of green smoke. The damage it received was very slight. Bai Xiaowen's eyelids twitched. This senior leader Kale Man and his giant lizard mount cooperated so well. The giant lizard he was riding was also a level 6 commander creature. When the two were combined, the effect of 1 + 1 was greater than 2. The powerful defense of the giant lizard greatly increased the difficulty of killing Kale Man. Fortunately, after the stun effect on the elite of the remnant disappeared, the continuous state of inspire also disappeared. The veterans of the Whitestone Army could now fight against the elite of the remnant whose attributes were reduced by half, and they were not suppressed by the other party. The only troublesome one was the warlord Kale Man. He rode the giant lizard and killed left and right in the crowd. With 70 points of strength and the advantage of his mount, he was like a war chariot. Wherever he went, people would flee. What should we do? Li Shui looked at Bai Xiaowen. She had developed a habit of relying on Bai Xiaowen. We must lure the orc warlord away. Bai Xiaowen said calmly. Leave this task to me. After luring the orc warlord away, kill his subordinates as soon as possible and finally form a siege. Okay. Li Shui did not ask how to lure the orc warlord away. She believed that Bai Xiaowen must have a way. After all, the storyline powerhouses in the spiritual realm were different from the AI in online games. They did not have an aggro mechanism. Moreover, the orc warlord Kale Man was not a fool. He would not ignore the situation and rush over to kill someone just because he shouted grandson. Therefore, when tankers tanked monsters, they relied on blocking the enemy's positions so that the enemy could not attack their fragile teammates and could only choose to attack themselves. Moreover, in the process of actual combat, the strength of tankers was often much inferior to that of the leader. It was impossible for them to always block the leader's blind spot and not come out. The leader would often break through the blockade and run into the fragile group of DPS players to start a massacre. This kind of fighting style also required a certain amount of life-saving ability for the DPS players, especially the important awareness of positioning. Of course, the tankers had the most important task. They had to constantly adjust their positions and always block the leader's attack route to attract attacks. Bai Xiaowen was not a tanker. Moreover, even if there was a tanker here, he might not be able to lure Kale Man out of the chaotic crowd. After all, the warlord had wisdom. However, Bai Xiaowen intended to make use of Kale Man's wisdom. Bai Xiaowen raised his right hand and flames danced in his palm. He was ready to cast the Kusanagi sect's ancient martial art, Orochi. In an instant, dense flame energy converged toward Bai Xiaowen. Fatty Suture puffed out his chest and protruded his belly. He stood in front of Bai Xiaowen and prevented the enemy from approaching. Kale Man immediately noticed that something was amiss. The wizard in front of him was actually about to cast a powerful spell. On the other hand, the soldiers on his side were at critical health. Could they withstand such a powerful spell? The answer was obviously no. Bai Xiaowen's threat level in Kale Man's heart increased explosively. The warlord roared like a bolt from the blue. He suddenly slapped the head of the giant lizard and charged toward Bai Xiaowen. Fatty Suture seemed to be very disloyal as he dodged sideways. Bai Xiaowen retracted the flames in his palm and used all his strength to escape from the battlefield. However, Kale Man's charging speed was calculated by doubling his speed. Bai Xiaowen's agility was also not high. Before he could escape far, Kale Man caught up with him. Just as the giant lizard's foot was about to step on Bai Xiaowen's back, Fatty Suture, who was in the middle of the battlefield, suddenly activated, Meat Hook. Asterisk crash. Asterisk a rusty chain was thrown over and wrapped around Bai Xiaowen's body before it was quickly dragged back. Kale Man's giant lizard raised its foot high and stomped down heavily, but it only stepped on empty air. At this moment, Kale Man was already more than 10 meters away from the battlefield. Moreover, due to inertia, the giant lizard he was sitting on could not stop and rushed forward another 10 meters before it came to a stop. Just as Kale Man turned around, the spell talisman in Bai Xiaowen's palm began to flicker. The blue spell talisman was selected and turned into a ray of blue light that shot forward. What? What spell is this? Kale Man was slightly surprised, but he did not panic. The giant lizard he was sitting on had amazing defense and was naturally resistant to physical and magical damage. Moreover, the giant lizard was loyal to him and the two of them cooperated well. The giant lizard raised its head and directly hit the blue spell talisman. In an instant, its huge body was dyed with a layer of blue light. Spell talisman switch, imprisonment spell talisman. The giant lizard's spiritual power was low, only in the single digits. Compared to Bai Xiaowen's spiritual power, the ratio was 1:8. Therefore, the duration of the imprisonment spell talisman was also quite long. Including the basic imprisonment time, the total duration was 10 seconds. Bai Xiaowen smiled and turned around. A light flashed in his hand as he used the grade A item, Death's Cry. With a long neigh, an elite terror knight wearing heavy armor and wielding a longsword descended from the black fog. It was worth mentioning that this elite dread knight was taller than the elite dread knights under Jarek's command in Maple City. In terms of size, he was almost as tall as Jarek. This was because the elite terror knight was Bai Xiaowen's summon creature by default and enjoyed the 20% increase in all attributes of Bai Xiaowen's shaman, as well as the 34-point bonus of Bai Xiaowen's high spiritual power. In terms of strength, it was more than 30% higher than the ordinary elite terror knight. The elite terror knight directly activated charge and rushed into the soldiers of the remnant. After knocking several people away, it threw out a sweeping skill and directly slashed 2 remnant survivors with low HP. A black light emerged from the corpses of the 2 remnant survivors, and the powerful passive ability enslavement was triggered. The 2 remnant survivors turned into zombies and skeletons and stood up again, raising their swords at their former comrades. Bai Xiaowen, on the other hand, took out the Desert Eagle and opened fire. After killing 1 remnant survivor with a headshot, he activated rapid fire mode, and silver bullets poured out continuously. Li Shi also began to attack wildly, and the 2 passive abilities stacked up within a few seconds. His 2 swords slashed repeatedly, and he only attacked and did not defend, quickly reaping the lives of the remnant survivors with low HP. As for the attacks of the remnant survivors on Li Shi, they were all blocked by Fatty's huge body. Fatty's HP was as high as 325 points, which was comparable to the HP of a Grade 3 boss. Facing the remnant survivors with all attributes reduced by half, Fatty did not feel much pressure. Moreover, Fatty also had 19 points of strength, and its kitchen knife was extremely painful when it slashed, and the remnant survivor soldiers could not ignore it. And all of this was seen by the orc warlord Kale Man. Kale Man desperately slapped his mount, wanting to rush over and protect his soldiers. However, the giant lizard under his mount was in a state of imprisonment and could not move at all. After seeing one of the orc guards who had been following him being killed, Kale Man finally could not bear it anymore. He roared and jumped off his mount, waving his huge bone mallet, and rushed into the crowd. Bai Xiaowen was not surprised, but delighted. He mentally connected to Kits and said, "You don't have to deal with the main battlefield anymore. Lead the first elite team of the Whitestone Army and surround that lizard. You must not let it join up with the Orc Warlord. After I take care of the Orc Warlord, I'll come over to support you." Kits laughed and said, "It's just a beast. Don't worry, Lord Boss." Although the giant rock lizard was a Grade 6 boss creature, it was mainly strong in defense. Its agility was very low, and its strength was average. Kits and a group of Grade 4 to Grade 6 intermediate elites surrounded it and formed a formation. They would definitely not let the giant rock lizard rush out. At this time, more than half of the remnant survivors' soldiers had been killed or injured. It should be known that Bai Xiaowen had 200 people on his side, and they had the advantage in dealing with the wounded and exhausted army. Moreover, there was also Bai Xiaowen and his many summoned creatures, such as the Wrath Claw, the Elite Terror Knights, the Shadow Assassins, and the Skeleton Mages. Their damage output could not be underestimated. The only threat was the Orc Warlord Kale Man. Chapter 275. Wherever Kale Man went, the soldiers of the Whitestone Army fled. Bai Xiaowen's eyelids twitched. After all, these soldiers were not well-trained elites. Bai Xiaowen had only commanded them for 10 days. It was unrealistic to expect them to fearlessly block Kale Man's huge bone mallet with their flesh and blood. When facing elite enemies of similar strength, the soldiers of the Whitestone Army could still barely be used. However, when facing a violent leader like Kale Man, Bai Xiaowen still had to rely on himself. With a wave of his hand, the fixed-point airdrop effect of the Black Soul Stone was activated. A skeleton sword and shield soldier appeared in Kale Man's path and slashed with its blade. Kale Man did not even look at it. With a backhand sweep, he directly smashed the skeleton sword and shield soldier into bone fragments. In front of the terrifying 70 points of strength, blocking specialties and defensive postures were nothing but empty talk. Don't just stand there. Kill these barbarians. Bai Xiaowen summoned a second skeleton sword and shield soldier to block Kale Man and shouted at the other Whitestone Army soldiers. The gun in his hand did not stop firing as it continued to rain bullets. The Whitestone Army soldiers avoided Kale Man and focused on Kale Man's subordinates again. The remaining elite soldiers were cut down one by one, and their numbers were quickly reduced. Kale Man let out a roar and was about to rush over when Bai Xiaowen summoned another skeleton sword and shield soldier. It appeared in front of Kale Man and together with another skeleton sword and shield soldier, they hugged Kale Man's legs tightly. Kale Man held the bone mallet with one hand and punched with the other. With 2 punches, one skeleton sword and shield soldier was smashed into pieces. He raised his leg and sent another skeleton flying. With a sweep of the bone mallet, it was smashed into bone fragments. However, the obstruction of the 3 skeletal shield bearers had bought enough time for Bai Xiaowen's side. The number of surviving soldiers continued to decrease. After Kale Man broke through the barrier of the skeleton swordsman, the last orc guard fell under Li Shi's sword. Witnessing the deaths of his soldiers, Kelman's veins bulged as he glared at the culprit, Bai Xiaowen. He gritted his teeth and said, "You are dead. I'll cut your head off." Bai Xiaowen took a deep breath. Killing all the remaining soldiers was just the first step. Next, they would have to face the powerful Beastman warlord Kale Man. Only by killing this leader would they be able to claim victory in this ambush. It was undeniable that even if Kale Man was alone, she still had the strength to wipe out Bai Xiaowen's forces. All of you, go to Kits and keep an eye on that beast. The White Stone Army could not be counted on, so Bai Xiaowen simply sent them away to clear the battlefield. The real battle had just begun. Wrath Claw, Li Shi, Fatty Suture, and the elite Terror Knight rushed forward. Kale Man glanced at them contemptuously and raised his bone mallet, preparing to strike. However, a lightning throw bombarded him from the side. The electric force flowed on the surface of his body and successfully froze his body, interrupting his sweeping motion. Chi. Li Shi activated the demonic flame dance. His two swords glowed with fire as they continuously stabbed Kale Man's back, which was wrapped in animal hide. After all, Kale Man had 42 points of constitution. The lightning throw only froze his body for a moment. After feeling the pain, he turned around and swung his bone mallet, smashing it toward Li Shi. However, Wrath Claw pounced and forcefully collided with the bone mallet before it was fully charged. With a muffled bang, Wrath Claw's buffalo-like body was knocked back a few meters. Its HP dropped by nearly 100 points, and it was dripping with blood. This was also because the bone mallet had not fully utilized its strength and had actively collided with the bone mallet. If it had been passively hit by the bone mallet, the outcome would have been instant death. However, Wrath Claw's level 4 strengthening effect, Blood Rage, was also activated. Its critical strike rate increased by 60%. Its body was covered in a layer of blood. It pounced forward and used Bite and Rend at the same time, leaving many wounds on Kale Man's body. Blood flowed freely. Fatty Suture's kitchen knife slashed fiercely, and Bai Xiaowen's Desert Eagle was also pouring bullets. The Shadow Assassin used the assassination skill and hit Kale Man's back. Although it could not trigger the instant kill effect, the additional bleeding status was a real damage output. The elite Terror Knight's long-handled greatsword also left a bloody hole on Kale Man's body. As Bai Xiaowen and the others' levels were relatively low, they were only level 3. The damage they dealt to Kale Man was reduced by his armor. The actual damage they dealt was only slightly more than 30% of the theoretical damage. Everyone's single attack damage was very low, mostly around 10 points. There were only two differences. One was Wrath Claw. Bai Xiaowen intentionally controlled it to take an attack. When its HP dropped to 40%, it had an additional 60% critical strike rate. Basically, 2 out of 3 attacks would trigger critical strikes. The damage was considerable. The other was Li Shi. After activating Fiery Dance, not only did she deal over -15 damage per attack, but her attack speed was also astonishingly high. She also had a high critical rate. Hence, she firmly occupied the top spot of the team's damage output. Although Bai Xiaowen and the other summon creatures did not deal high damage, they were outnumbered. The combined damage from a round of attacks was definitely higher than Li Shi's or Wrath Claw's. This was the advantage of a summoner. In just a few seconds, Kale Man's HP dropped by hundreds. Kale Man roared angrily and mumbled something in the language of the Remnant. The blood that flowed from his body suddenly turned into steam and then flowed into his body. Behind him, the shadow of a tall blood-red orc appeared. The spiritual realm's rules prompted, Hammer Berserker Kale Man's passive skill, Blood Rage, has been activated. The HP lost within a certain period of time will be converted into Blood Rage points to strengthen the attack power of the next attack. Bai Xiaowen shouted, "Retreat!" Li Shi hurriedly retreated a few steps out of Kale Man's attack range. Bai Xiaowen controlled the summon creatures to retreat at the same time. He stared at Kale Man's movements and did not retreat. Die! Kale Man treated Bai Xiaowen as his first priority target. The bone mallet swept towards Bai Xiaowen with a terrifying gust of wind. It was so strong that Bai Xiaowen could barely open his eyes. It was difficult for him to even move an inch, let alone dodge. In fact, Bai Xiaowen had been staring at Kale Man's shoulder movements all along. After such a long battle, he had already figured out some of Kale Man's moves. he had already predicted that this attack was a horizontal sweep. He suddenly leaned back and fell to the ground like a block of wood. The bone mallet almost brushed past the tip of his nose. Then, Bai Xiaowen desperately rolled to the left. Kale Man's enhanced horizontal sweep missed. Due to inertia, his body staggered. In fact, with his combat skills, under normal circumstances, he could change his attack from a horizontal sweep to a downward smash. This was also the reason why Bai Xiaowen had immediately rolled to avoid his original position after falling to the ground. However, Kelman had used Blood Rage to strengthen his attack this time. While his attack power was greatly increased, his flexibility and control were greatly reduced. It was more ruthless but not stable enough, which was why he was unable to change his attack. The blood-red orc shadow behind Kale Man disappeared. Bai Xiaowen got up after rolling. Although his movements were awkward, his expression was calm. He continued to fire. Without needing his orders, Li Shi and the summoned creatures rushed over and continued to attack. Kale Man swung his bone mallet at Li Shi. However, the elite Terror Knight rushed forward and used its body to block the attack for Li Shi. The full extent of this attack's damage was quite frightening. It was as if a train had collided with the fearsome Spirit Knight, sending him and his horse flying 7 to 8 meters away. The Spirit Knight's HP had decreased by 70%, leaving him with less than 30% of his HP. One must know that the elite Terror Knight was the type with high strength and vitality but low agility. With Bai Xiaowen's various buffs, its HP was 240 points. Kale Man's attack was terrifying. After sending the elite Terror Knight flying, Kale Man did not stop for a second time. His movements were as smooth as flowing water. Once a violent warrior like him started to swing his heavy bone mallet, it was like a moving windmill. No one could get close to him. Another lightning throw hit Kale Man from the side and interrupted his movements. The second mallet disappeared into thin air. The windmill momentum was over. However, there was no effective way to interrupt Kale Man's third mallet. Fatty had to take the hit. With a muffled bang, Fatty the Stitched's fat body was sent flying. His HP dropped by more than 100 points. With Fatty's high HP of 325 points, he could only take 2 hits at most. The third mallet was almost certain to kill him. If it triggered a critical hit, he would be insta-killed. Go for the HP. Go for the damage. While Kale Man was swinging his brutal bone mallet, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi were also desperately attacking. Kale Man's HP kept decreasing. Suddenly, the blood mist rose and condensed into a huge blood-red orc shadow behind Kelman. The second blood rage. This time, without needing Bai Xiaowen's reminder, Li Shi took the initiative to retreat. Only Bai Xiaowen was left in melee range to attract Kale Man's attacks. With Bai Xiaowen's ability to predict his movements, as long as he dodged in advance, there would be no problem. Kale Man's face revealed a sinister smile. He suddenly raised the bone mallet in his hand and smashed it down. This mallet is a little off target? Li Shi was a little surprised. Boom! The huge bone mallet smashed into the ground. An astonishing force burst forth. A large area in the cone-shaped area was overturned, and sand and stones were sent flying. This time, Kale Man's blood rage points were used to enhance his skill, Earth-Shattering Slam. Obviously, Kale Man had learned his lesson from the first time. He did not enhance his normal attack. Instead, he enhanced his AoE attack. As long as Bai Xiaowen was sent flying by the Earth-Shattering Slam, it would be impossible for him to dodge in the air. Kale Man would be able to beat Bai Xiaowen into a pile of flesh and bones like a baseball. However, in the midst of the sand, a figure leaped high into the air like an eagle. The height and distance of this jump were astonishing. It was at least twice as high as normal. Kale Man was 2.5 meters tall. He was considered quite tall among the beast men. However, Bai Xiaowen's jump height was actually a few inches higher than his head. As he leaped, Bai Xiaowen had already activated the skill glide from White Eagle's Assault. He perfectly avoided the shockwave damage and the stun effect of the earth-shattering slam. Moreover, Bai Xiaowen did not retreat. Instead, he advanced and jumped in front of Kale Man. While Kale Man was in the state of using the enhanced earth-shattering slam, Bai Xiaowen kicked him in the chin. Then, he followed up with a second kick. This time, he used the Grassland Sect's ancient martial art, 75 styles, modified. Originally, this move could kick the enemy into the air and put them in a defenseless state. Then, he would follow up with a stronger move. However, it was a pity that being in the air required a certain amount of strength. Bai Xiaowen only had 18 strength. It was far from Kale Man's 70 strength. Even with the additional 50% kick damage from glide, he was unable to kick Kale Man into the air. He only made the Beastman warlord's tall and burly body sway slightly. A long howl sounded. The moment Bai Xiaowen's kick landed, he controlled the Wrath Claw to use its third skill, Howl. The attack power and attack speed of all members within a radius of 100 meters increased by 20%. This was a powerful team battle skill. Bai Xiaowen had been holding back and not using it because he wanted to deal with Kale Man, a powerful leader. Then, the Wrath Claw pounced forward and pushed Kale Man to the ground. It then used its ultimate move to suppress him. Suppressing also required a strength judgment. Bai Xiaowen had already done his best to create the conditions for Kale Man to sway and lose his center of gravity. Now, it was up to the Wrath Claw to succeed in suppressing him. As long as it succeeded, it would mean that it would have at least 2.5 seconds of maximum damage output. Enemy's strength judgment success rate has severely decreased. Target is in a stunned state after using an enhanced skill. Suppression success rate has increased, target is in an unbalanced state. Suppression success rate has increased, suppression failure rate. The moment Kale Man fell to the ground, he roared and threw away his bone mallet. He reached out with both hands and grabbed one of the Wrath Claw's front legs. He forcefully broke the leg bone and threw it to the ground with all his might. The Wrath Claw's head was smashed to the ground. Brain matter splattered everywhere. This attack triggered a critical hit. It was an instant kill. Your summoned creature, the Wrath Claw, received 196 damage from the throw, critical hit, 134 damage. The Wrath Claw has died. Your skill, Summon the Wrath Claw, is currently unavailable. You can revive it in the game screen after you leave the spiritual realm. Li Shi screamed. His two swords spun like a windmill and stabbed Kale Man in the back. This was the Wrath Claw's first death. In the past, when she and Bai Xiaowen were besieging the leader, the Wrath Claw had blocked countless attacks for her. Bai Xiaowen's eyes were as cold as ice. There was an extreme coldness in them. He did not even have 0.1 seconds to grieve for the Wrath Claw. After he landed, he continued to shoot. At the same time, he ordered the other summoned creatures to swarm forward and take advantage of the 20 seconds of Howl to deal damage. After Kale Man killed the Wrath Claw, he stood up and reached out to grab the bone mallet. However, he realized that the bone mallet had become much heavier. Just as Kale Man's bone mallet left his hands to resist the Wrath Claw's suppression skill, Bai Xiaowen ordered Fatty Boy to rush forward and try to grab Kale Man's huge bone mallet. As long as this weapon was taken away, Kale Man's damage would definitely decrease. However, Fatty Boy's 19 points of strength was not enough to lift this terrifying bone mallet. Chapter 276. The bone mallet seemed to be much heavier than usual. Kale Man took a deep breath and lifted the bone mallet. Fatty, who was hugging the bone mallet, was lifted up as well. Kale Man's 70 points of strength was indeed terrifying. However, with Fatty hugging the bone mallet, it was impossible for Kale Man to wield it as freely as usual. An expert was used to using a weapon. Even if it was a few taels heavier, it would feel very different from usual. Furthermore, Fatty weighed 200 to 300 kilograms. Get lost. Kale Man's bone mallet landed on the ground and roared. His thick knuckles smashed down with his fist. His fist was heavy and powerful. Even after being weakened by Fatty's armor, it could still deal around 80 points of damage. Every punch was as terrifying as a pile driver. However, compared to when he was holding the bone mallet, the damage was a whole level lower. While Fatty was hugging the bone mallet and enduring Kale Man's punches, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shui were not idle. With the 20% increase in attack power and attack speed, Kale Man's HP dropped rapidly like an avalanche. Kale Man threw 2 punches and his HP had dropped to less than 200 points. He roared again, and the blood-red shadow of the gigantic orc rose behind him. The third blood rage. He punched Fatty right in the middle of his back. The damage of this punch was terrifying. It pierced through Fatty's body and dark purple blood flowed down Kale Man's arm. Fatty died in battle. In exchange, Bai Xiaowen and the others attacked Kale Man for 3 seconds and reduced his HP to less than 100 points. Kale Man tore Fatty's body into 2 pieces. His hands, which were stained with dark purple blood, lifted the huge bone mallet again. His fierce eyes were filled with the joy of revenge. However, with Kale Man's intelligence, he could tell that the giant wolf and zombie goblin he had just killed were the summoned creatures of the black-robed wizard in front of him. This was one of Bai Xiaowen's illusions in the eyes of spirit world characters. Only by killing this black-robed wizard would he be able to achieve true victory and revenge. Kale Man aimed at Bai Xiaowen and raised the blood-stained bone mallet. The elite Terror Knight appeared out of thin air and blocked Bai Xiaowen's path. However, the elite Terror Knight was sent flying in the next second. Kelman's HP was less than 120 points. He stepped forward and swung his bone mallet. This time, he faced the Shadow Assassin. Kelman's HP fell below 100 points. That valiant beastman warlord felt the shadow of death. He suddenly beat his chest and roared, and the shadow of a huge blood-red beastman appeared behind him once more. Sensing the danger its master was in, the giant rock lizard stopped by Kits and the other elite soldiers in the distance suddenly raised its head. It aimed at Bai Xiaowen's back and shot out 2 spiral-shaped rays of light. This was the giant rock lizard's only control skill, Petrifying Stare. At the same time, Kale Man's body was covered in bloody light as he raised the bone mallet high. His plan was simple. He wanted to take advantage of Bai Xiaowen being petrified and unable to move to kill him with a wave of blood rage. However, under the cover of Bai Xiaowen's spiritual power, every movement of the giant rock lizard was clear as day. He didn't even turn his head. A skeleton swordsman appeared behind him, blocking the path of the petrifying stare. This was the last skeleton swordsman, and also the trump card Bai Xiaowen had been hiding. It was to block the skill at a critical moment. However, Kale Man's skills were all AoE and couldn't be blocked, so he had been hiding it until now. Crack, crack, crack. The skeleton swordsman was petrified. Bai Xiaowen predicted the position of Kale Man's attack and pounced to the side. Boom! The bone mallet smashed into the petrified skeleton swordsman, smashing it into a pile of bones. After the blood rage effect, Li Shui and the others, who had retreated, pounced forward and continued to attack. Kale Man's health points fell below 80 points, then 70 points, 60 points. With a loud boom, Li Shui's demonic fire jade pendant ended, and the +7 special effect, burst, was triggered. The accumulated fire force gathered and exploded in Kale Man's body. He let out a muffled roar. Blood spurted out from his mouth, ears, and all the wounds on his body. Under the evaporation of the fire force, the blood turned into a bloody mist and evaporated. Kale Man's raised bone mallet fell powerlessly. He knelt on the ground with one knee, supporting himself with both hands. His health points had dropped to 1 out of 720. He was in the 3 statuses where he couldn't move, attack, or cast spells. He was hanging on by his last breath. According to Bai Xiaowen's understanding, the boss had already fallen. It was just the cutscene. What a disgrace. Kale Man muttered. I thought my life would end at the hands of a powerful warrior. I didn't expect it to be weak humans. He was speaking the common language of the Gorse Empire, ancient Latin. Of course, Bai Xiaowen could understand him. The orc warlord Kale Man continued. If the forbidden spell hadn't injured me and forced me to use the great shaman's blessing, you wouldn't have been able to defeat me. Bai Xiaowen heaved a sigh of relief. Only the weak find excuses for their failure. After saying this, Bai Xiaowen lost interest in chatting. The losses in this battle were greater than he had expected. Even the Wrath Claw had died in battle. Fortunately, the rules of the spiritual realm indicated that the Wrath Claw could be resurrected in the checkout interface. However, he didn't know how much he would have to pay. In addition, there was still a level 6 boss creature, the Armored Lizard, waiting for Bai Xiaowen to deal with. Bai Xiaowen shot Kale Man in the forehead. The Orc Warlord Kale Man fell to the ground, dead. The spiritual realm's rules notified him, your team has killed the commander of the vanguard of the survivors, the giant hammer berserker Kale Man. Your reputation in the Human Alliance has greatly increased. Your current reputation level is Reverence. Your reputation in the Sinful Realm Alliance has greatly decreased. Your current reputation level is unchanged. The golden treasure chest that Kale Man dropped was obviously larger. It shone with a mesmerizing golden luster. Bai Xiaowen exhaled and put away the golden treasure chest. Together with Li Shui, they went to find the Armored Lizard. The Armored Lizard's defense was amazing. It was born with stone armor. Whether it was physical or magical damage, it was greatly reduced. Bai Xiaowen and the others' attacks could only deal single-digit damage. In terms of defense, it was much stronger than Kale Man. However, its strength was average, its agility was poor, and its attack was weak. It couldn't break through the encirclement of the guards and Julian's cavalry. Also, Bonita kept using Saintly Hand to heal the guards, and none of them died. The reason why Bonita didn't participate in killing Kale Man was because of the battle's evaluation. If a character from the spiritual realm participated, the reward for killing the boss would be reduced. Besides, Burrita's healing was nothing compared to Kelman's insane damage output. She would still be insta-killed. There was no need for her to join in the fun. Bai Xiaowen ordered the guards to retreat. He and Li Shui attacked the Armored Lizard together. Without a powerful damage dealer like Kelman, the Stone Lizard was nothing more than a punching bag. Under the combined attacks of Bai Xiaowen, Li Shui, the Shadow Assassin, and the Skeleton Mage, the lizard's HP slowly decreased. It was worth mentioning that the Armored Lizard's HP recovered very quickly. It would recover 5 or 6 HP in the next second after losing 10 HP. With this ridiculous HP recovery speed and incredible defense, the lizard's survivability was unbeatable. If the Armored Lizard also had strong attacks, it would be too unfair. It shouldn't be at the level of a level 6 boss creature. After more than 20 minutes, they finally killed the Armored Lizard. Of course, it was also because the Wrath Claw, Skeleton Swordsman, and other summon creatures had died. Li Shui's accessory had also used its ultimate move, so its damage output was much lower. The Armored Lizard, on the other hand, was a boss creature with fast HP recovery speed. It bullied the Awakened who didn't have enough damage output. If it were a few other classes, they wouldn't be able to recover as quickly as they attacked. How could they win? From this, it could be seen that Bai Xiaowen's initial judgment was to separate the Armored Lizard from Kale Man. If the two boss creatures worked together, it would be extremely difficult to deal with. Think about how abnormal Kale Man's damage output and the Armored Lizard's survivability would be. After the Armored Lizard died, it also dropped a golden treasure chest. Bai Xiaowen gathered the Whitestone Army. The Whitestone Army didn't suffer many casualties in this battle, losing more than 40 people. However, they achieved the glorious result of annihilating the defeated vanguard army of the remnants. They made a great contribution and could be considered a great victory. Bai Xiaowen encouraged Kits and the others. Not only did he promise to confer the title of a second batch of knights, but he also promised a reward of 20 gold coins per person. The compensation for the dead would be doubled. In any case, he was now rich. These gold coins that he couldn't take away might as well be used to boost morale. Kits and the others, who used to be bandits, cheered. the Whitestone army went to clean up the battlefield and cut off the heads of the soldiers of the remnants as proof of their meritorious service. The ground was full of the corpses of the remnants, and there were even more of them who died in the Black Iron Mountain range. However, most of them were burned to a crisp. They could only be barely recognized from their fangs that they were a subspecies of the remnants. Every Whitestone army soldier had 1 or 2 heads of the remnants hanging on their waists. Even the recruits had a share. Cutting off the enemy's head could be regarded as letting them see blood and give them some courage. Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi also cleaned up the battlefield. They collected the treasure chests. The final count was 2 golden treasure chests, 5 silver treasure chests, and no ordinary treasure chests. Suddenly, Bai Xiaowen's eyebrows twitched and he looked to the south. His spiritual power sensed that there seemed to be a large group of people approaching. Kits lay on the ground and listened with his ear to the ground. Then he raised his head. "Lord, there are cavalry and infantry. There are at least hundreds of people approaching. They are coming from the south. They are definitely not enemies. They should be the pursuing troops of His Highness," Bai Xiaowen said. It turned out that Bai Xiaowen's judgment was correct. Soon, they saw the Human Alliance army led by Prince Nicholas. "Baron Dior?" Prince Nicholas saw Bai Xiaowen from afar. Just as he called out to him, he suddenly froze for a moment. Behind Bai Xiaowen was a battlefield full of corpses. The most conspicuous one was undoubtedly the headless body of Kale Man, who was leaning on a huge bone mallet. "No way?" Lord Julian, who was next to Nicholas, said in a daze. On the other side, Lady Cecilia, who was wearing a cool white armor, was also stunned on the spot. They had rushed over, thinking that they were going to rescue Baron Dior, or that the battle was over and they were going to collect the body of Baron Dior. But now, the battle was indeed over. Baron Dior led the 17th Infantry Formation and directly killed a large number of elites of the remnant people, as well as Warlord Kale Man. He was simply caught off guard. The first one to react was Nicholas. He flipped over and dismounted from his horse. He laughed and said, "Baron Dior, you have given me a huge surprise again." Bai Xiaowen gently tapped his chest with his right fist, indicating for Keats to present Kale Man's head. He said in a clear voice, "This victory is dedicated to the great prince. Your brave charge on the battlefield determined the outcome of the battle. What I've done is just an insignificant supplement." Nicholas was pleased. He said with a smile, "Humility is a virtue, but there is no need to be overly cautious. It was my negligence not to set up an ambush in advance. But you thought of this and made up for it in advance. In the end, you were able to successfully kill the enemy leader. This is a great contribution." After a pause, Nicholas said, "I will report to His Majesty to promote your title and expand your fief." A notification came from the spiritual realm. "Your team has received 3,000 merit points from the Human Alliance army. Prince Nicholas' favorability towards you has increased. His current favorability is acquaintance." 3,000 merit points were equivalent to part of the reward Bai Xiaowen received for completing the B-level Heroes Side Mission 1. More importantly, he had gained Prince Nicholas' favor, which increased his authority in the Human Alliance army. These were all hidden benefits. As for the title and fief, they did not mean much to Bai Xiaowen. "All troops, retreat and follow me back to Blackrock Fortress. From now on, Baron Dior is qualified to attend and speak at high-level military meetings," Prince Nicholas announced. He then patted Bai Xiaowen's shoulder and rode away. Bai Xiaowen returned the 20 cavalrymen to Lord Julian. During the battle, Bai Xiaowen did not let the 20 cavalrymen clash head-on with Kale Man's remaining troops. Instead, he arranged for them to shoot arrows on Black Iron Ridge. After all, the cavalrymen's archery skills were not bad. Seeing that his precious cavalrymen did not suffer any casualties, Lord Julian said emotionally, "Brother Dior, thank you very much." He had already mentally prepared himself for the complete annihilation of his cavalrymen. Bai Xiaowen shook his head. "On the contrary, I should be the one thanking you." The two looked at each other and smiled. Bai Xiaowen received a notification that Lord Julian's favorability had increased to friend. White Rose Cecilia rode over and looked at Bai Xiaowen with a complicated expression. You win, but don't expect me to apologize. She then rode away. This little widow. Bai Xiaowen muttered softly. Then, he received a notification from the spiritual realm. Chapter 277. After absorbing the souls of the two bosses and some elite survivors that Bai Xiaowen had contributed to, the growth of the Black Soul Stone had increased to 115 soul essences. The victory of this battle also filled Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi's combat experience bar, and they could level up to level 4. Now that they were in the spiritual realm, they could level up. The two of them chose to level up on their way back. Bai Xiaowen's strength, dexterity, and constitution increased by 2 points, and his spirit increased by 5 points. Li Shi's strength and constitution increased by 2 points, his spirit increased by 1 point, and his dexterity increased by 4 points. Then, Bai Xiaowen received a prompt message from the spiritual realm's rules. Your profession level has been promoted to level 4. Your profession skill, Mind Link, has a chance to be strengthened. Do you want to draw it? After leveling up to level 4, powerhouses and monsters in the spiritual realm's storyline would go from beginner to intermediate. There would be an obvious increase in their strength. When they reached level 7, the increase would be even higher. As an awakened, their profession skills would be strengthened. This was also consistent with the spiritual realm's rules. Li Shi also got a chance to draw a profession skill. There were too many people around, so Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi chose not to draw it for the time being. After returning to the Black Rock Fortress, Prince Nicholas ordered the whole army to rest and reorganize. The 9 lords of the northern frontier were assigned residences in the Black Rock Fortress. Although they were relatively small, in terms of safety and comfort, they were much better than the commander's tents in the 3 lines of defense outside the city. Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi did not stay in their residences in the Black Rock Fortress. Instead, they returned to the commander's tent in the line of defense. Compared to the Black Rock Fortress, where there were many nobles and red tape, the two of them felt that the front line was better and freer. Although they had inherited some memory fragments of the former young lord, Bai Xiaowen, a fake, would inevitably be exposed and arouse suspicion if he stayed with a group of nobles for a long time. It was better to stay with the soldiers at the front line and win the praise of sharing weal and wool with the soldiers. The female Lord Cecilia did the same. She stayed at the 3rd line of defense with the soldiers under her command. She ate but did not sleep. Moreover, the way she looked at Bai Xiaowen had become much gentler. Bai Xiaowen had given up his comfortable life in the Black Rock Fortress and had chosen to suffer with the soldiers on the front line. This should have made this White Rose admire him, but she didn't say it out loud. In the tent, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi began to draw the lottery. The first draw was the Awakened Skill Enhancement. The spiritual realm's notification, checking your level 1 to level 3 combat EXP, detection. In the process of leveling up from LV1 to LV3, the EXP gained from killing lords is 0%, the EXP gained from killing bosses is about EXP gained from killing elites is about EXP gained from killing normal enemies is 7. 91%, EXP gained from killing normal enemies is 5. 34%. Levels. Heroes levels. Elites levels. Elites. Based on your evaluation, the roulette wheel has been generated. Please complete the draw within 1 minute. A roulette wheel appeared in front of Bai Xiaowen. The roulette wheel was divided into 4 areas: ordinary, excellent, and perfect. However, unlike before, the white roulette wheel area was less than 10% of the area. The white roulette wheel area was about 20% of the area, and the white roulette wheel area was 60% of the area. It occupied more than half of the area. Finally, the black roulette wheel area was a little more than 10% of the area. It seems that the roulette wheel's levels. The more you kill monsters above your level and complete more difficult missions, the more likely you are to draw high-quality enhancements, Li Shi said. This is very good news for the awakened who are challenging difficult missions, such as us. After a pause, Li Shi said, then, when we encounter ordinary monsters and low-difficulty missions in the future, can we choose to give up on them? Bai Xiaowen shook his head and laughed. You're exaggerating. This roulette wheel is just a little compensation for the awakened who are challenging difficult missions. If we delay our growth for the sake of a small chance of drawing a prize, we'll lose the big picture. Li Shi thought about it and agreed. He smiled embarrassedly and urged, hurry up and draw. Bai Xiaowen's fingers moved on the roulette wheel's needle. The needle finally stopped slowly and stopped at the 60% area of the excellent level. You've drawn the class skill enhancement effect of class level 4. Your class skill mind link has obtained the excellent level special effect, life sharing. Life sharing, you can designate a summoned creature to share health points with you. The summoned creature must be in combat. When you receive damage or healing, your health points will be synchronized until you disconnect life sharing. Every time this effect is disconnected, it will take 24 hours before you can designate it again. There was a special prompt at the end. When one of the targets of life sharing receives a vital point attack, the instant kill effect will not be triggered, but its current health points will be reduced by 100%. What did this mean? Here's an example. Bai Xiaowen and summon creature A share health points, and their current health points are 200 points. If Bai Xiaowen is hit by a vital point attack and the theoretical instant kill effect is more than 1/3, it will not die immediately, but it will cause a high damage of 200 points. This damage will be shared between Bai Xiaowen and summon creature A. This is a good special effect. Li Shi said in surprise. I've heard that for the summoner class, although this life-sharing special effect is only excellent level, it's better than some perfect level special effects. It greatly enhances the safety of the summoner class. If you designate a meat shield, such as the stitched monster Fatty, as the target of life-sharing, you and Fatty will share an overall health points of 600 points, which is enough to make any decapitation tactic ineffective. It's indeed a good special effect, Bai Xiaowen squinted and said. Actually, designating Fatty is not the best choice. The Wrath Claw is the best target. The Wrath Claw's level 4 enhancement effect is Blood Rage. The lower the health points ratio, the higher the critical hit rate. However, the Wrath Claw has too little health points, and when the ratio of health points is low, it can be easily killed. If I have life sharing with it, its safety will be greatly improved, and it will be more willing to sacrifice its health points. Chapter 278. Li Shi also drew her profession level 4 enhancement special effect. Her battle score was similar to Bai Xiaowen's. She also drew an excellent grade special effect. It didn't have a name, but there was a new description for the Wind Thunder combo. Wind Thunder combo, every time a melee attack hits the opponent, you will receive 1 stack of combo effect. Maximum of 10 stacks. Each stack of combo effect increases attack speed by 2% and critical hit rate by 2%. Every critical hit on the target will reward you with a Mark of Thunder. Lasts for 30 seconds. Maximum of 5 Marks of Thunder can be stacked on the same target. You can choose to detonate all the Marks of Thunder in your next melee attack to deal additional damage. This skill was similar to the combat mechanism of the Rogue in the Mountain Pass of Another Time and Space. The Mark of Thunder could be seen as a combo point for the Rogue, but it required a critical hit to trigger. This additional effect was not very useful against normal enemies with low HP, but against elites or bosses with long HP, it was more useful. Li Shi's dexterity was now as high as 35 points, and after stacking all his talents, it reached more than 45 points. His critical hit rate was quite high, and the Wind Thunder combo had a 20% cumulative critical hit rate bonus. In the 30-second duration of the Mark of Thunder, at least 5 critical hits could be completed, and the damage was considerable. Of course, if the target was an agility-type boss, Li Shi's dexterity would be suppressed, and he might not be able to achieve this. Good, in terms of the profession enhancement special effect, our luck is quite good. Our strength has increased. Now it's time to open the treasure chests. Bai Xiaowen happily took out all the treasure chests. For a moment, the tent was filled with gold and silver light, and the visual effect was quite good. The two of them opened the level 6 Stone Lizard Boss Gold treasure chest first. The Stone Lizard's battle score was only B, and there was no doubt that the White Stone Army soldiers had lowered its score. However, with only 2 draws, they had drawn 2 pieces of gold equipment. Their luck was quite good. The first piece of equipment was the lizard's tough belt. As a gold equipment, it simply added 5 points of constitution and had no other attributes. However, as a waste equipment slot, 5 points of vitality was already quite valuable. It was definitely worthy of being a gold equipment. This equipment was given to Li Shui. Her basic constitution was only 13 points. Including the 30 HP bonus from the Eclipse badge, she only had 160 HP. As a warrior, it was a little low. With this equipment, Li Shui's vitality had increased to 18 points. His total HP was at 210 points, and his defense had exceeded 20 points. In fact, Bai Xiaowen could also wear this equipment. However, he already had a blue equipment, Rhino Strength Belt. Li Shui did not have a belt. The second item was a ring. Tailbone of Petrifying Lizard, bound after pickup, grade, hero, gold, equipment position, finger, prerequisite, none, additional attributes, none, additional skill, stone armor. Once activated, your skin will be as hard as a rock. Your physical damage will be reduced by 10 points, but your attack speed and movement speed will be reduced by 40%. Cooldown, 8 hours. Durability description: this is a ring made of stone. If a fossil is also a stone. This gold equipment only had 1 stone armor skill. The damage reduction was not bad, but the penalty on attack speed and movement speed was hard to accept. Basically, it was the same as the White Eagle's attack. It was an uncommon gold equipment and was not worth much. Li Shui was a melee DPS. Of course, he needed to stay alive. However, damage output was his specialty. Of course, he did not want this ring. Bai Xiaowen still had a ring slot on his other hand, so he wore it. An Awakened could only wear 2 psionic rings at most, 1 in each hand. If he wore 2 psionic rings on one hand, psionic equipment, the 2 rings would be in close contact at all times. This would cause the disturbance of psionic particles, and the properties of the 2 rings would not be effective. Of course, he could wear as many rings as he wanted on Earth, which did not contain any spiritual energy particles. After opening the Stone Lizard's treasure chest, Bai Xiaowen opened Kale Man's large gold treasure chest. Kale Man's treasure chest was much more high-end than the Stone Lizard's treasure chest. 12 cards floated in the air amidst the golden light. The engravings on the cards were much more complicated and detailed than the gold cards he had seen before. After killing Kale Man, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shui received an A rank evaluation. Unfortunately, Bai Xiaowen had thought that he could get an S rank evaluation, but it seemed that he was still a little short. Bai Xiaowen was the first to choose. His first draw was a good start. He drew a skill book. Earth-shattering slam, 3-star skill. Shocks the earth. Causes moderate physical damage to enemies standing in a cone-shaped area and sends them flying. The enemies will be suspended in the air for a long time and will be unable to defend themselves. Requires 2-handed melee weapons. Skill learning requirements: 2-handed weapons, including but not limited to 2-handed hammers, axes, and swords. Skill upgrade to level 7. Base strength 40. This skill was quite powerful. There were 2 highlights. First, the skill's priority was high. The success rate would definitely be increased accordingly. Second, the additional abnormal state was sent flying. Moreover, it was specifically stated that it would be suspended in the air for a long time. Generally speaking, the Awakened ones divided abnormal states into 3 categories: soft control, hard control, and super hard control. Of course, this was what the Awakened ones called it. Soft control was generally an effect that restricted movement, such as cold, freezing, binding, and so on. Although the target under soft control was unable to move, they could still attack or cast spells. In addition, the silence effect, which unilaterally restricted spellcasting, also belonged to the soft control category. Hard control not only restricted movement, but also restricted attack and spellcasting abilities. For example, effects such as fear, transformation, stun, paralysis, taunt, suppression, and so on. The target under these abnormal states was not only unable to move, but also unable to attack or cast spells. Of course, there were differences between hard control. For example, the fear effect was obviously not as good as the stun effect. Because the fear effect would wake the target up after being hit, while the stun effect would not. Regardless of whether it was a soft control or a hard control, it could be removed through the use of control removal skills or control removal items. It was nothing more than a competition of priority. According to Yamaguchi-san, it could be resolved through handing over. The last type of super hard control was the most abnormal type of control. At the awakened stage, there were only two types, knockback and knockback. For example, Li Shi's reckless charge had a knockback effect, which was a type of super hard control. Of course, the knockback effect generally only knocked the target back a short distance, so it was not very useful. But knockback was different. It made the target's body stiff and enter a state of floating and unable to defend. This kind of super hard control was not immune to control reduction skills such as Sincere Heart, Heart of the Sky, and Warlord's Perseverance. Even if the Eclipse Badge or Green Lotus Seed were used to remove the control, it was useless. The target could only be treated as a punching bag in the air. After Li Shi activated Zhao Yun's mark, he obtained the skill Chain Carry. With the strength of a level 3 elite, he was able to beat the level 6 leader Jarek. What did he rely on? It was this kind of abnormal knockback control. Unfortunately, this earth-shattering slam skill book's requirements were too high. Not to mention the level 7 two-handed weapon specialty, just the basic 40 points of strength was a natural chasm. We're a little ahead of ourselves in the challenge. We killed a level 7 leader when we were only level 3. The reward is good, but we can't use it. Bai Xiaowen could only regretfully put the skill book away in the storage space. Li Shi then drew the second golden card. She drew a beating heart, which gave her a big fright. Berserker's Heart, S-grade special treasure. It can be used in the upgrade slot of the equipment upgrade card to greatly increase the success rate of equipment upgrade. It can also add additional effects to the equipment. Special hint, it is recommended to choose equipment with high compatibility with the Berserker class to upgrade. Bai Xiaowen continued to smile bitterly and shake her head. It was a good item, but she could not use it for the time being. Even if she thought with her toes, she knew that equipment with high compatibility should be weapons such as two-handed axes and hammers, followed by heavy armor and plate armor. However, these equipment were not to Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi's liking. Fortunately, the Berserker's Heart did not state that it was bound to the party. It could be traded. At least with this point, it could retain its value. Then, Bai Xiaowen drew the card for the last time. The gold card was flipped over. After Bai Xiaowen saw it clearly, she smiled. Finally, it's an equipment. Another ring. Pain Ring, binds after pickup, grade, hero, gold, equipment position, finger, equipment requirements, 15 base strength, 15 base agility, attributes, none, skills, pain potential, passive skill. For every 10 points of damage you receive, you will gain 1 point of strength. This effect only calculates damage received within the last 30 seconds. Durability description, only pure strength can bring about pure victory. This ring is not bad, Bai Xiaowen commented. However, it's not suitable for you. Li Shi thought for a while and nodded. If I don't sell my HP, this equipment is equivalent to a blank item. It's not suitable for me. As a damage dealer, no matter what kind of life-saving skills they had, no matter how much HP they had, they should never think about deliberately taking damage to increase their damage output. It was still the same saying, only a living damage dealer could deal damage. This ring was most suitable for tank-type professions. Tank-type awakened ones needed a considerable amount of strength to ensure that they could block the boss position under the premise of ensuring that their vitality was high enough. Now that there were no tanks in the party, they could only give it to Bai Xiaowen. If Bai Xiaowen used life-sharing to target the Wrath Claw would deliberately take damage. Bai Xiaowen would also share the damage, and his strength would also increase, increasing his damage output. Although Bai Xiaowen already had 2 rings, one of which was blue quality, plus 2 spirit, he could still use them interchangeably. Although the large environment of psionic particles caused the battle to be digitized, the battle process was still close to reality. During the battle, he could also replace his equipment, but he would have to be distracted. For example, the action of taking off the ring and putting it back on was difficult for the general melee professions to do in a fierce battle. However, as a long-range player, Bai Xiaowen could do it with his multitasking ability. Since the Pain Ring was a passive skill that could take effect at any time, Bai Xiaowen equipped it first and temporarily replaced the Petrifying Lizard Tail Bone. When he needed to use the Petrifying Lizard Tail Bone, to save his life, he could replace it and activate the skill. At this point, the 2 bosses' gold treasure chests had been drawn. Later, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi opened a few more silver treasure chests. Unsurprisingly, they were all water tanks. It was probably because the elite survivors had all their attributes reduced by half. In the last 5 silver treasure chests, in addition to opening a bunch of psionic points, there were 2 ordinary white equipment that were bound when picked up. With the current vision of Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi, this kind of white equipment was not even qualified to be used as auxiliary combustion equipment when strengthening equipment. They were directly broken down in exchange for psionic points. After opening the treasure chests, the total psionic points of the 2 had reached more than 80,000 points. The summon creatures in Bai Xiaowen's Dark Soul Stone had also been upgraded to level 4 with his level. However, when these undead summon creatures were upgraded to level 4, there would no longer be a wave of strengthening effects. However, the attribute growth of the summon creatures was real, and with the improvement of Bai Xiaowen's spirit, their attribute bonuses were also higher. The Shadow Assassin's agility had reached 25 points, the Skeleton Swordsman's strength had reached 15 points and Constitution had reached 14 points, which was far beyond the level of ordinary skeleton soldiers. The Skeleton Mage's spirit had risen to 24 points, and the theoretical magic damage of a lightning throw was more than 40 points. As for the Stitched Monster Fatty, who was still in the state of death and had not yet been resurrected, its Constitution had also reached 28 points. This guy had an additional 30% HP bonus. At present, its total HP had reached 364 points, and it could withstand more damage. Unfortunately, Fatty's spirit was too low. After upgrading to level 4, it only had 6 points, which was really a shortcoming. It could only use its meat hook once in a battle at most, and its spirit was almost exhausted. Counting on its spirit recovery rate of 0.6 points per minute? It was impossible. Bai Xiaowen patrolled the defense line and promoted several elite veterans who had performed well in the Black Iron Gorge battle to knights. Each of them was given a fief. This simple knighthood ceremony attracted a lot of onlookers. Among them, Lord Julian and Lady Cecilia were also present to witness it. After the pensions and rewards were distributed, the morale of the Whitestone army was even higher. He dared not say that the army was strong, but at least the morale of the army could be used. The embryonic form of a brave army had begun to appear. After the ceremony, Lady Cecilia stayed behind. It's rare to see a lord as generous as you. The other lords won't like you. Perhaps it was because her favorability had risen to the level of an acquaintance. Cecilia spoke more casually. Among the cavalry under my command, several of them are qualified to be conferred titles. I'm afraid they won't be able to sleep tonight when they go back. If I'm not wrong, your newly knighthoods used to be bandits. Bai Xiaowen said seriously, they have been good for more than 10 days. You're so easy to give your family's land to bandits? You're really an interesting person, Cecilia said. If there are no brave soldiers who fight, can the northern frontier be defended? Bai Xiaowen shook his head. Although the vanguard of the survivors has been destroyed, the main force has not yet arrived. The situation of this war is very serious. In special times, there should be special systems. We can't stick to the old ways. Chapter 279. Bai Xiaowen was a little confused for a moment, but then he reacted. This little widow, is she flirting with me? Li Shi squeezed over. Yes, yes. Xiao, brother's dance partner is me. Cecilia smiled. Charlotte, that's not good. I know you and your brother have a deep relationship, but you have to live your own lives. Among my knights, there are several young and handsome men. You can choose one of them to be your dance partner tonight. Cecilia waved her hand. Tim, Mark, Phil. The three of you, come here. 3 handsome knights in white armor walked over side by side and saluted the 2 lords. Tonight at the Blackrock Fortress, choose one of you to accompany Miss Charlotte to the ball, White Rose Cecilia said briefly. The 3 knights looked at Li Shi, their eyes full of eagerness. The rules of the spiritual realm would change the appearance of the awakened, but it was still based on their original appearance. Therefore, Bai Xiaowen's current appearance was that of a handsome Nordic man with 3-dimensional facial features and deep-set eyes. However, it was not obvious because he was wearing a wizard's cloak. Li Shi's appearance was also that of a beautiful Nordic girl. After taking control of the Red Leaf territory, Li Shi's original made costume was somewhat out of place. Under Bai Xiaowen's reminder, she spent 100 psionic points to change into a tight-fitting hunting suit for a noble lady. It was full of heroic spirit and did not lose its charm. Needless to say, it was very attractive to the knights under Cecilia's command. Once again, this kind of costume was only effective in the eyes of the characters in the spiritual realm. Bai Xiaowen, who was also an awakened, still saw Li Shi wearing a snow-white sword robe and a shining cloak. After sending out 3 wingmen, Cecilia continued to attack her target. What's wrong, Baron Dior? Are you going to refuse a lady's invitation? Bai Xiaowen glanced at Li Shi. Li Shi looked over with a faint smile. Bai Xiaowen definitely didn't want Li Shi to be someone else's partner. Even though he knew nothing would happen, he was still unhappy. Putting himself in her shoes. Li Shi probably wouldn't want him to accept Cecilia's invitation either. Madam Cecilia, I really can't. If I offend someone, so be it. Just as Bai Xiaowen was about to refuse, Li Shi suddenly interrupted him. Brother, I'm not feeling well today, so I won't go to the ball. You can go and accompany Miss Cecilia. Have fun. Bai Xiaowen was a little stunned. He looked at Li Shi and saw a mysterious smile on her face. Bai Xiaowen reacted quickly and immediately continued, It seems like I can't refuse a beautiful lady's invitation. I'm honored to be your partner, Madam Cecilia. Cecilia carefully sized up Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi. She seemed a little suspicious, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded and said, Okay, see you at the ball. The 3 white-armored knights were a little disappointed that Li Shi had rejected them. They followed Cecilia unhappily and left. After they were far away, Kits whistled softly. Boss, it seems like White Rose is very interested in you. The fief she inherited is adjacent to Red Leaf Hill. If you can take her down, the 2 families will be connected by marriage. Your fief will more than double. Don't say what you shouldn't say. Hurry up and train the recruits. Bai Xiaowen said with a straight face. Kit shrank his head. The White Stone Army soldiers who were looking around all scattered like birds and beasts. Only Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi were left in the tent. There was a notification just now. Cecilia and I are friends now, Bai Xiaowen explained with a wink. If I refuse, we won't become enemies, but the level of affection will probably drop to normal. Okay, don't find these excuses. Li Shi smiled. You just want to agree, right? Bai Xiaowen quickly denied, Of course not. You're the only one in my heart. Li Shi stopped smiling and poked Bai Xiaowen's chest with his slender fingertips. Okay, don't say such words to trick little girls. Mother and the two aunts have said that you can't watch over men too closely. We still have a long way to go. I don't expect you to only have me in your heart. Bai Xiaowen was touched and happy to hear this, but he didn't hesitate. Li Shi had already put it this way. If he continued to hesitate, he would be pretentious. Moreover, this was the background of the Psionic era. It was common for male awakened masters to have multiple wives, not legally. For example, Li Beihai of Mount Tai. But I must be the most important one in your heart, Li Shi added. Bai Xiaowen nodded. Also, you can't just take any woman home when you're hungry. Li Shi remembered. Like Liang Zitong, Zhao Yuding, and the like. You can't have any of them. I don't have high expectations for you in this aspect, but I don't want you to fight all day long and have no peace at home. Bai Xiaowen continued to nod. He was a little surprised. Shouldn't a girl of Li Shi's age be the most protective of her food? If she was a first-year girl in another time and space, let alone two-timing, even if she looked at another girl, she would be jealous and make a big fuss. Bai Xiaowen then thought that this should be caused by the background. Girls in the Psionic era and girls in another time and space certainly had different ideas. They couldn't be lumped together. After all, the era was different. In a feudal society, wives would take the initiative to take concubines for their husbands. The Psionic era was a society of the strong. The so-called equality was only relative. It was unrealistic for awakened masters to be equal to ordinary people. It was also unrealistic for the top awakened masters to be equal to the bottom awakened masters. Li Shi grew up in a family with 3 wives. He had been influenced by what he saw and heard since he was young. It was normal for him to have a high acceptance of this aspect. Evening, Black Rock Fortress. Bai Xiaowen, dressed in a lord's costume, entered the ball hand in hand with White Rose Cecilia. Usually, his face was covered by a black robe and cloak. Now that he had changed into a lord's costume, Bai Xiaowen's good looks were fully displayed. Cecilia often peeked at Bai Xiaowen's side face when she pretended to be inadvertently. Bai Xiaowen, on the other hand, looked straight ahead and kept smiling. In fact, he had already sensed Cecilia's peeping when he opened his spiritual power. He was secretly happy, but he didn't show it because he wanted to show off. Ah, who did I see? Baron Dior. To our great hero, Baron Dior. One by one, well-dressed nobles came over to greet Bai Xiaowen. Some of them even brought their daughters and wives to meet Bai Xiaowen. These noble ladies and ladies, through different channels, had heard about Bai Xiaowen's deeds of killing the commander of the vanguard army of the remnants. Moreover, they had different versions of the rumors that had been beautified. Naturally, their eyes were shining when they looked at Bai Xiaowen. There were also weak young girls who held their chests and looked like they would faint at any time. You are more popular than I thought. Enjoy this moment, hero of mankind, Cecilia said softly. Cecilia said softly, maybe some delicate noble lady will secretly pass you a handkerchief. In fact, I'm not interested in delicate women, Bai Xiaowen said with a smile. Cecilia's body stiffened a little. She seemed to understand the meaning of Bai Xiaowen's words, and a faint blush appeared on her face. However, Cecilia was, after all, a leader-level expert who commanded a region. She only showed a moment of shyness before returning to normal. She smiled and said, I can see that your sister Charlotte is a brave girl who dared to wave her sword at the orc warlord Kale Man. I like her very much. However, the custom of the Gorse Empire's noble circle has always been to prefer delicate noble ladies. This can reflect the chivalry of those sissies. Bai Xiaowen pointed around covertly and said quietly, that doesn't seem to be entirely correct. I see that many people are paying attention to you, Lady White Rose. When they saw that Cecilia was holding on to Bai Xiaowen's arm, many of the northern frontier lords revealed expressions of surprise and envy. Them? They just think that conquering me will give them something to brag about. Cecilia said disdainfully. Then, she looked at Bai Xiaowen and suddenly changed into a charming expression. As for you, Baron Dior? Do you have the same idea? If I say no, it would be rude to a beautiful lady, Bai Xiaowen said seriously. You are like the moon in the night sky, a rose in the rain. As long as one is a man, they will not be able to resist your charm. Cecilia put away her charming smile and said, compared to others, your sweet words are nothing new, Dior. I have always been a man of action, Cecilia. This flattery seemed to have hit the nail on the head, but in fact, it was quite effective. Calling her by her name was an improvement. Prince Nicholas's voice sounded and announced the start of the dance. Long accordion music sounded, accompanied by a soothing melody. Noble couples twirled gently on the dance floor. Bai Xiaowen was a little embarrassed. The memories of the young lord he inherited clearly did not include flirting and dancing. When he was dancing, his body was as stiff as a bag of wet cement. Cecilia hugged Bai Xiaowen's neck and said softly, You don't seem to be very good at dancing, Dior. A little, Bai Xiaowen said. I have heard of your romance. Your performance is somewhat inconsistent with the rumors. Cecilia's eyes shone with a special light. Is it because you haven't danced for a long time that you are rusty? Bai Xiaowen's lips curled into a smile. No, it's just that you're too charming, Cecilia. You give me a feeling of nervousness and restraint that I have never felt before. In fact, after being rusty at the beginning, Bai Xiaowen easily remembered the simple slow dance routine with his memory and gradually became more proficient. After the dance, when they rested at the side of the venue, a group of nobles began to talk about the war. Prince Nicholas held this ball not just for dancing. There must be a plan for how to deal with the coming main force of the remnant. Prince Nicholas did not dance. He sat on the main seat, surrounded by a group of nobles dressed in lord's clothes. Bursts of laughter could be heard. This victory has thwarted the spirit of those beasts. His Highness has made great contributions. Yes, this victory has set the tone for the war. We will win. As long as His Highness is leading, the joint army will not fail. Prince Nicholas smiled and said, If it weren't for the divine spells cast by Archbishop Arlo's order of priests, the outcome of this war would be hard to predict. Hearing this, Bai Xiaowen hurriedly asked, Is Archbishop Arlo here? He was also an important figure, and his status was probably not inferior to Nicholas. Nicholas shook his head and said, Archbishop Arlo and the priests of Holy Light have overdrawn their strength in today's battle and are resting. Besides, a ball like this is not suitable for the clergy to participate. A tall noble came over and said, Hi, Baron Dior, I heard that you performed well in this battle and are the hero of the joint army. What do you think of this war? Bai Xiaowen glanced at him. Cecilia introduced him softly, This is Count Denton, the commander of the 1st Infantry Phalanx. Count, a high noble rank. From the fluctuations of the psionic particles, Bai Xiaowen could sense without using his insight that this was a commander. My opinion may be a little different from everyone's. Bai Xiaowen narrowed his eyes and said after thinking for a while. Huh. Someone was puzzled. Our opinion? We think that the war will be won, don't you think so? Shortly after entering the venue, Bai Xiaowen found that the entire Blackrock fortress was full of optimism about the war. Just now, several nobles were chatting and thought that the arrival of the main force of the Allied army was just a repeat of today's scene. It was not surprising that the short-sighted nobles who were content with pleasure thought so. But did Nicholas really think the same way? Nicholas was well aware of the severity of the undead plague. Bai Xiaowen quickly figured out the key points and faced the questioning eyes of the crowd. He said slowly, The main force of the Allied army is completely different from the vanguard. When facing the vanguard, didn't we already see the fighting power of the beasts? The lives of 4 or 5 human soldiers may not be able to exchange for one of them. Why do you still think that this war will be won? Baron Dior, you are too pessimistic. Count Denton's face sank. The individual strength of the Allied army is indeed strong, but our advantage is greater. Several nobles who were silent just now spoke one after another. Yes, We have Archbishop Arlo's Church of Holy Light, a few more forbidden spells. Purify all those beasts. We are the defending side. We have strong city walls, catapults, and ballistae. What do those beasts have? We are backed by the Empire and have endless support. What about the rear of the Allied army? It's just a desert. Chapter 280. Bai Xiaowen's words were like a bucket of cold water, dousing the joyous atmosphere. Cecilia looked at Bai Xiaowen with a complicated gaze. Of course, she could feel that the way the others looked at Dior had started to change. Logic told Cecilia to take a few steps away and distance herself from Dior. However, in Cecilia's heart, she felt an inexplicable sense of admiration for this young leader who dared to speak his mind. How good was that? He insisted on his own ideals, was not afraid of power, did not follow the crowd, and did not flatter others. In this filthy circle of nobles, there were fewer and fewer people like him. However, the others obviously did not think so, especially Count Denton, who had been humiliated. He snorted heavily. Baron Dior, if you did not have the merit of killing the Orc vanguard, I can say that you are a coward based on what you said just now. The nobles who stood on Count Denton's side all began to criticize Bai Xiaowen, and some even questioned his battle merits. How can such guts be considered a hero of the human alliance? I heard that Baron Dior took advantage of that Orc vanguard after he was severely injured by Prince Nicholas. Yes, His Highness the Prince was magnanimous and praised him. However, this Dior really does not know his place. He actually dared to be so presumptuous in front of His Highness the Prince and the Count. Bai Xiaowen ignored these nobles and looked at Count Denton. He said calmly, those who dare to admit that the enemy is strong are not cowards. Those who do not dare to face reality and are immersed in their own fantasies are the real cowards. When the enemy arrives, the cowards who are immersed in their fantasies will pay a heavier price for their lack of preparation. Enough. Seeing that the dispute was escalating, Prince Nicholas raised his hand to stop the conflict. This was because he saw that the nobles on the dance floor had stopped dancing at some point and had turned into onlookers to watch. There were still whispers in the crowd. Most of them were talking about how Baron Dior did not know what was good for him, and how he became arrogant just because he had made some contributions. Dio, I can understand your concern, Prince Nicholas nodded and said solemnly. However, this is a ball to celebrate our victory. I don't want any quarrels to ruin the atmosphere, so please don't speak anymore. The muscles on Bai Xiaowen's face twitched as he revealed an unwilling expression. However, he still exhaled and bowed. Yes, Your Highness. After bowing, Bai Xiaowen left the small circle and sat in the corner of the ballroom in silence. When everyone saw his appearance, they all respectfully distanced themselves from him. Those delicate young ladies began to look for a new target that would make their hearts faint. Do you mind if I sit here? A familiar voice sounded. White Rose Cecilia gently sat down beside Bai Xiaowen. Bai Xiaowen smiled helplessly. Miss, you should stay away from me. He pointed at the small circle not far away, where Prince Nicholas and Count Denton had resumed their jubilation. Is that so? Cecilia revealed a charming smile, but she sat closer to Bai Xiaowen. Their legs were not close yet not far away. Even through their clothes, Bai Xiaowen could feel the elasticity and tightness of her thighs. Today, you showed me another form of courage, Cecilia leaned closer to Bai Xiaowen and said softly. Compared to bravery on the battlefield, the courage you just showed is even more precious, Dior. Don't laugh at me, Cecilia. Bai Xiaowen leaned back against the wall and stretched. This should be called reckless. Cecilia suddenly leaned over and put her arms around Bai Xiaowen's neck. It was the same action as when they were dancing. However, they were not dancing now, so this action was undoubtedly a little too intimate. Fortunately, they were in a corner, and very few people looked over. Bai Xiaowen's body stiffened slightly. He could feel Cecilia's softness brushing against his arm. Then, Cecilia's slightly cold lips pressed against Bai Xiaowen's cheek. Do you believe that I'm not laughing at you now? Cecilia said softly. I support you, Dior. A notification from the spiritual world's rules came. Lord Cecilia's favorability towards you has increased. Current favorability level, friend. Your favorability towards a spiritual world figure of the opposite sex, Lord Cecilia, has reached the friend level. You can now check the level of devotion between you and her. Lord Cecilia's devotion to you is moved. Bai Xiaowen was a little surprised. It turned out that there was a devotion system independent of the favorability system between the opposite sex. This was the first time he had encountered it. There was no such thing in the information he had collected in the past. After all, this was the venue of the ball. Cecilia only kissed Bai Xiaowen's cheek lightly before retreating. Bai Xiaowen didn't dare to act rashly, lest he made a fool of himself. After calming himself down, Bai Xiaowen silently checked the information regarding devotion. The feedback given by the spiritual world's rules was, devotion is usually a relationship between members of the opposite sex. There are a total of 7 levels. Under normal circumstances, the devotion level is hidden. It will only be revealed when certain conditions are met. The devotion level is normally ordinary. As the devotion level increases, the higher levels are admiration, moved, love, and true love. The devotion levels below ordinary are dislike and disgust. The feedback was a little sparse. Bai Xiaowen continued to inquire, if it reaches the love or true love level, what will happen? In this regard, the spiritual world's rules didn't continue to give an answer. Awaken, please explore on your own. Bai Xiaowen curled his lips. Bai Xiaowen poured cold water on this ball. It also made the nobles in the Black Rock Fortress remember Bai Xiaowen, this young boy. Until the end of the ball, no one continued to discuss the topic of the refugees. Let's go. Bai Xiaowen stood up. Suddenly, a waiter came over and bowed. Honorable Baron Dior, His Royal Highness is preparing to hold a high-level military meeting and invites you to attend. Prince Nicholas once said that Bai Xiaowen had the right to participate and speak in high-level military meetings. It seems that His Royal Highness isn't angry because of this. Go ahead, don't worry about me. Cecilia was also happy for Bai Xiaowen. Chapter 281. The high-level military meeting was held in a room with burning charcoal. The furnishings in the room were simple. There was a round table in the middle, surrounded by a few chairs. A military map of the northern borderline hung on the wall behind the main seat. If there was anything special about the room, it would be the portrait of His Majesty the Emperor of the Gorse Empire hanging on the wall. There were 5 people sitting in the meeting room. Count Denton, the commander of the First Phalanx, who had a falling out with Bai Xiaowen, was present. Prince Nicholas sat on the main seat, while Count Denton sat on his right, showing his special status. The servant led Bai Xiaowen to the seat facing Nicholas. Welcome, Lady Cecilia, Baron Dior. Prince Nicholas nodded. Please allow me to introduce you. Bai Xiaowen bowed and stood up. Every time Prince Nicholas introduced a person's name, he glanced over and nodded slightly in greeting. Out of the 4 people sitting beside Prince Nicholas, 3 of them were introduced. Other than Count Denton, who was the commander of the First Phalanx, there was also a chief of staff and a magic consultant, who were all Nicholas' confidants. The remaining person was not qualified to be introduced by the prince. He was an ordinary clerk. Although he was also the prince's confidant, his status was not high. When Bai Xiaowen was introduced to Count Denton, this tall and strong count walked over with a smile and patted Bai Xiaowen's shoulder, completely different from his cold demeanor during the ball. Baron Dior, I would like to apologize for what I said at the ball. I have to admit that you were right. Bai Xiaowen blinked his eyes, revealing a blank expression. Ha ha ha. Count Denton laughed. Dior, do you think that Prince Nicholas and I are a bunch of fools who can't see the reality? Bai Xiaowen quickly shook his head. I wouldn't dare. The situation of this war is indeed dire. Count Denton stopped smiling and said sternly, however, it is enough for us, the decision-makers, to know this in our hearts. If the whole city knows about this, it will shake the morale of the army. Moreover, those nobles of the northern frontier might run away in advance, bringing the citizens of Black Rock City with them. Pausing for a moment, Count Denton continued, most of the nobles who attended the ball did not know how strong the enemy was, but there were a small number of people who knew. But for the sake of the morale of the army, they did not stand out to expose the enemy. Instead, they went with the flow and appeared optimistic. What Count Denton was implying was that only a hothead like Bai Xiaowen would take the initiative to step forward and expose the truth at the risk of offending others. I was too rash. Please forgive my rudeness, Your Highness, Bai Xiaowen said. Nicholas waved his hand and smiled. It's fine. When I was your age, I would say whatever came to my mind. I wouldn't think too much about it. In fact, Bai Xiaowen had guessed that Nicholas had the idea of calming the army. Otherwise, he would not have held the ball during this tense period. However, he still chose to express his disagreement. To put it bluntly, it was all for the sake of gaining face. Today, most of the nobles were disdainful of Bai Xiaowen's minority speech. When the main force of the adherents arrived and the Black Rock Fortress felt the pressure, they would think of Bai Xiaowen's wisdom. As for Prince Nicholas, Bai Xiaowen's minority speech would not detract from his points of view. On the contrary, it would create an impression that he had a high IQ but a low EQ. While showing his military talent and foresight, he would also show a certain degree of weakness in communication. Such talents had always been the favorite of those wise monarchs, and the benefits were indescribable. The door opened and a servant led a tall and thin old man in a red priest's robe in. Everyone present stood up to welcome him, including Prince Nicholas. Let's welcome Archbishop Arlo with the most sincere applause. Without his large-scale forbidden spell, it's hard to say who would have won the battle. Prince Nicholas took the lead in applauding. Sparse applause sounded in the small meeting room. Archbishop Arlo's face was a bit pale. He nodded slightly and paid his respects to everyone present. This is the glory of God. I am just a humble supplicant. Also, I can't do this without the help of my colleagues in the Church of Holy Light. Bai Xiaowen had heard from Cecilia that Archbishop Arlo's forbidden-level divine spell, Light of Creation, had turned the tide of the battle. However, judging from how weak he was after casting the divine spell, Arlo probably did not have the energy to cast it a second time. Well, since everyone is here for the military meeting, let's talk freely. According to the report of the scouts, the allied forces of the remnants of the sinful realm were all out this time. Even the old, the weak, the women, and the children were forced to join the battle. Even the children who were not as tall as the wheels of the carriage joined the ranks of the logistics army. Prince Nicholas said. In terms of numbers, the allied forces of the remnants of the sinful realm are not inferior to our allied forces. As for their combat power, I believe everyone present has a certain understanding. There was a sound of gasps. Count Denton cursed. These barbarians have no morals at all. Even the children are forced to join the army. Bai Xiaowen shook his head secretly. It was a matter of life and death. For the survival of the race, the allied forces of the sinful realm would definitely use the strength of the entire race. If they won, they would be able to drive south and occupy a large area of fertile land on the Kane continent. But if they lost, the best result would be to be driven back to the sinful realm desert. Bai Xiaowen had already learned that the sinful realm desert was even more desolate and cold than the most barren territory in the north. It was not suitable for human survival at all. Even the strong subspecies of the remnants of the sinful realm did not have a high survival rate. Therefore, the allied forces of the remnants of the sinful realm desert held a desperate attitude towards this war. Unlike the Gorse Empire, which had not attracted enough attention and only stationed a legion of a few thousand people in the north. As for the arrival of Prince Nicholas and Archbishop Arlo, it was just a coincidence. When Arlo was investigating the undead plague in the north, he discovered the signs of the remnants of the sinful realm desert. Ignoring the dissuasion of his subordinates, he stayed in the Black Rock Fortress and sent someone back to the capital to ask for help. Bai Xiaowen's second main mission required him to hold on for 10 days. According to Bai Xiaowen's estimation, it should be the time when the reinforcements sent by the Empire would arrive at the Black Rock Fortress. After denouncing the unethical behavior of the Allied forces of the sinful realm, the topic returned to how to fight back. Chapter 282. Nicholas was the first to ask for Bai Xiaowen's opinion. Bai Xiaowen's previous performance had successfully increased his importance in Nicholas' mind. Bai Xiaowen had already thought about it after Nicholas announced that he was qualified to attend the high-level military meeting. Your Highness, the number of the Allied forces of the remnants is no less than ours, and their combat power is several times that of ours. However, in this war, as the defenders, we also have our own advantages, Bai Xiaowen said. The Black Rock Fortress has a strong defense, and the walls are made of hard black rock. For the enemy, the weakest point to break through is the city gate. We have already wiped out the vanguard of the remnants through today's battle, which severely dampened the enemy's spirit and boosted the confidence of the soldiers and civilians. So, next, we have to play to our advantage of defending the city. We can't rashly go out and fight the enemy in the field. The Chief of Staff frowned and said, "What should we do? Withdraw all the troops into the city?" Today's battle plan of the Allied forces was proposed by the Chief of Staff next to Nicholas. However, in Bai Xiaowen's view, the Chief of Staff was a bit amateurish in terms of war strategy. Not to mention the famous strategists of the Three Kingdoms, he was even inferior to Zhang Liao, Li Dian, and other good generals. If it was Bai Xiaowen who formulated the strategy of the first battle, he would never have let the weak allied forces of the northern frontier lords take the initiative to fight the vanguard of the remnants head-on. The casualties were as high as 4-1, which was simply murder. Using Nicholas as a surprise attack to lure out the enemy's elites and using Archbishop Arlo's forbidden divine spell to win the war could only be said to be good. However, it was only crushing the enemy with strength and could not be considered a brilliant move. In the end, it was also a failure that they did not send troops to ambush and intercept in advance. However, this was also determined by the war customs of the Cane Plain and had something to do with the cultural background. Generals were more accustomed to leading soldiers to charge in phalanxes and fighting with real swords and spears, rather than using tactics to win. Knowing the restraints between different types of soldiers and being able to send out different types of soldiers to fight under different conditions, or having multiple types of soldiers fight together, was already a pretty good commander. In the face of the Chief of Staff's doubts, Bai Xiaowen shook his head and said, "It's definitely not possible to withdraw all the troops. Holding up in defense is tantamount to giving all the initiative to the enemy. My suggestion is to actively defend and wait for an opportunity." There was a brief silence in the meeting room, as if everyone was mulling over the meaning of this sentence. "There seems to be a deeper meaning behind your words. Dior, speak your mind. Don't be nervous. It doesn't matter even if you say something wrong," Nicholas said. Bai Xiaowen nodded. After getting Nicholas's permission, he walked to the map behind the main seat. "We can enlist the people to dig trenches around Black Rock City to stop the rapid advance of the remnant troops," Bai Xiaowen said. "In a defensive battle, the longer it takes for the attacking troops to break into the city wall, the greater the loss." Count Denton nodded in agreement. "That's a good idea. We can place some obstacles in the trench, like spikes or something like that. That'll make the beasts bleed a little. This means that we have more time to shoot arrows and throw stones from the top of the city wall." The Chief of Staff nodded. Bai Xiaowen continued, "Not only on the city wall, but also near the city wall, we can build arrow towers. When the enemy charges, the soldiers stationed on the arrow towers can also shoot freely. If the enemy doesn't pull out the arrow towers, they will suffer a lot of losses. If they choose to attack the arrow towers first, the arrows and stones from the top of the city wall will also make them suffer heavy losses. The city wall and the arrow towers protect each other." "It's a genius design," Cecilia said softly. What Bai Xiaowen said was a very simple defense strategy from the ancient Huaxia, but to Nicholas and the others, it was like opening the door to a new world. While defending, we can't ignore the importance of offense. In my opinion, the supplies of the remnant troops should be an important weakness, Bai Xiaowen continued. The northern desert is barren, and there is a shortage of food. This time, even the old, the weak, women, and children of the remnant troops will follow the army. How will we solve the problem of food? Whether it's the orcs or the trolls, they all eat a lot. Therefore, we need to send more reconnaissance troops to find out the military distribution of the remnant troops. After finding the right opportunity, we will send elite forces to attack. If we can destroy important places such as their grain depots, it will be even better. Bai Xiaowen finally concluded, this is what I mean by active defense and waiting for an opportunity. Hold fast, so that the enemy has no opportunity to take advantage of. When the enemy's morale falls after a long battle, we will find an opportunity to attack the enemy's vital points. There was silence in the conference room. Prince Nicholas coughed and said, well said. Does anyone have anything to add? The others in the conference room shook their heads. What a joke! This active defense strategy was 10 times better than today's battle strategy. The two could not be compared at all. Well, then let's follow Baron Dior's suggestion and make a plan for the defensive battle. Prince Nicholas stood up, and everyone stood up. There was a crackling applause. Dior, you are a military genius. I hope you can continue to contribute your talents to the Empire and mankind, Prince Nicholas said sincerely. Bai Xiaowen received a prompt message from the spiritual world's rules. Prince Nicholas's favorability towards you has increased. Current favorability level, friend. Lord Cecilia's favorability towards you has increased. Current favorability level, friend. Lord Cecilia's favorability towards you has increased. Current favorability level, moved, unchanged. Archbishop Arlo's favorability towards you has increased. Current favorability level, acquaintance. Count Denton's favorability towards you has increased. Bai Xiaowen received a notification that he had gained favorable impression points. He exhaled softly. It was worth his effort to persuade them. The effect was not bad. Although there were no direct rewards of merit points or equipment, the people in the small conference room were the decision-makers of the Human Alliance army. Being able to gain their favorability was a great hidden benefit in itself. The meeting ended. Nicholas's chief of staff began to draft orders busily and handed them to Nicholas to issue to the commanders of the infantry phalanxes. Digging trenches and building arrow towers was not an easy task in this cold northern border. However, the spiritual world soldiers were different from the ordinary soldiers of the earth plane. They were often several times stronger than ordinary people. There was no problem with efficiency. Think about it. Bai Xiaowen used dozens of bandits as human locomotives. He dragged all the resources in the cliff mine and walked back to Whitestone Town. None of the bandits died of exhaustion. After the meeting, Bai Xiaowen found Prince Nicholas and volunteered to be the commander of the reconnaissance team. Prince Nicholas was puzzled. In his opinion, Bai Xiaowen would be more useful in the military meeting if he stayed in the city. However, the work of the reconnaissance team was also very important. It was especially important to find out the enemy's military strength and numbers. It was not something ordinary people could do. In the end, Nicholas agreed. He only reminded Bai Xiaowen to be careful. This made Bai Xiaowen unhappy. I've already volunteered to do such dangerous work. Why don't you give me some benefits? I don't have a leader like you. Bai Xiaowen tactfully mentioned that he needed some supplies. Prince Nicholas came to a realization. He grabbed the clerk who was writing furiously at the side. It turned out that the clerk was the quartermaster of the Black Rock Fortress, Basil Heber. Bai Xiaowen chose to open the merit exchange list. Basil Heber entered the mode of a human vending machine. So many? Bai Xiaowen felt as if his eyes were brimming with tears. This was the first time he had seen such a rich list of merit points. Compared to the list in front of him, Uncle Lu, the family of the grass, they could all go to hell. As expected of the prince's personal expedition, there were so many good things. There were 3 categories: equipment, tools, and food. Every time he opened a category, there was a dazzling array of items. There were dozens or even hundreds of items that could be exchanged from low level to high level. Of course, reputation points were needed to exchange for these items. However, Bai Xiaowen was now revered in the Human Alliance army. The items that could be exchanged for with friendliness and respect were usually low level. Bai Xiaowen was not interested in the low-level equipment and tools. Bai Xiaowen's eyes narrowed when he flipped to the end of the equipment column. The equipment in the last column were all gold equipment. Of course, the merit points needed to exchange for a piece of gold equipment were also very high. The cheapest piece of bracer was 5,000 merit points. Moreover, the gold equipment that appeared in the exchange list were all top-grade gold equipment with additional attributes. They did not have any additional practical skills. Bai Xiaowen and Li Shui did not have a complete set of equipment slots. Since they had enough merit points and did not need to exchange for other items, they could choose to exchange for some equipment that they did not have. They could also exchange for some blue and white equipment to avoid wasting merit points. However, the reputation points needed to exchange for gold equipment were worship. I wonder if there's a oath of shattering behind the tools column? Bai Xiaowen was concerned about the fragment item that could be used to build a permanent team. He carefully flipped through the list but did not find it. It seemed that this Oath of Black Peak mission could not be completed by exchanging items. However, there were still a few practical tools at the end of the list. Group Teleportation Scroll, S-Grade Tool. After use, teleport you and your nearby allies. Effective radius is the user's spirit/10 unit meters to the target area. If there are enemy targets near the target area, the teleportation will not work. High Purity Holy Water, S-Grade Tool. Can be smeared on weapons or armor. Has a significant effect on spirit/demon type enemies. Frost Storm Scroll, A-Grade Tool. After use, create a frost storm within a radius of 100 meters. All enemies within the range will suffer freezing damage and slow down. Lasts for 10 seconds. There were also good items in the food category. Food such as rye bread could restore health points during battle. The effect was slightly lower than the buns in the Three Kingdoms plain world. However, rye bread was only the lowest grade food. There were higher grades after it. It could provide a certain buff after consumption. It did not stack with the effect of combat potions. It was really amazing. What made Bai Xiaowen's eyes light up was the wheat wine. It could restore the physical strength of an awakened. It was the same as the rice wine in the Three Kingdoms plain world. It was a specialty of the plain. It was probably a food unique to the European plain in the Middle Ages. The merit points required to purchase wheat wine were not high. Each bottle only cost 25 points. Bai Xiaowen bought 20 bottles and spent 500 merit points. When he used the flame moves of the grassland sect's ancient martial arts to attack the enemy, it would consume his physical strength. After looking through the food category, the list of items to be exchanged did not end. There was also a small category called Special Items. Bai Xiaowen gave it a glance. Just as he was about to turn the page, he suddenly stopped. This is a returning tool? Town Teleportation Scroll, Special Item. After use, the Awakened will be immediately teleported back to Earth, regardless of whether they are in a combat state or not. It can only be used in the spiritual realm. Important note, if the main mission is not completed, all the power points, equipment, and items obtained in the spiritual realm will disappear. Bai Xiaowen looked at the price of the Town Teleportation Scroll. It was 5,000 merit points. The value of this item was difficult to determine. However, it was undeniable that in some situations where one needed to gamble, having a Town Teleportation Scroll on one's person would give one more confidence. Moreover, the Town Teleportation Scroll did not have any binding requirements. It had a high exchange value. Thinking about how 5,000 merit points was comparable to the exchange price of gold-grade equipment, Bai Xiaowen smiled bitterly. Although it was expensive, Bai Xiaowen was still determined to exchange for it. Moreover, he would exchange for as many as he could. According to the information Bai Xiaowen had collected, returning tools were very rare and precious. This was the first time Bai Xiaowen had encountered one in the fourth plane he had explored. If he did not buy it now, there would be no medicine for regret in the future. As for whether a town teleportation scroll was worth a piece of gold-grade equipment, on Earth, the price of a returning tool was much higher than that. Many big shots who did not lack money would pay a satisfactory price for a returning tool. Thus, this item was definitely worth a lot of money. After looking at the exchange list, Bai Xiaowen left Blackrock Fortress. Cecilia followed him silently all the way. After walking out of the fortress, she asked, "Why did you take the initiative to apply for the reconnaissance mission? Staying with the prince is not only safe, but also an opportunity for a meteoric rise." Of course, Bai Xiaowen wanted to kill more enemies and get more treasure chests, but he could not tell her this reason. He looked back at Cecilia and smiled. Only by understanding the enemy can we defeat them. I want to see with my own eyes how strong the main force of the allied forces of the remnants is, so that I can come up with a way to deal with them. In addition, in the military meeting, I have already told all the tactical strategies I can think of. It is useless to stay with the prince as an advisor. Chapter 283. In the frozen lands of the northern frontier, the wind was bitterly cold. Thud thud thud, the sound of horse hooves sounded like raindrops. Dozens of horsemen, led by 3 knights, galloped to a high hill. The 3 knights at the front were 1 male and 2 females. They were Bai Xiaowen, Cecilia, and Li Shui. Not bad. In just 2 days, your horsemanship has improved a lot, Cecilia said with a smile. Dior, if you don't want to be a wizard and choose the path of a knight, you should be able to achieve something. Bai Xiaowen smiled. On his personal interface, there was an additional advanced specialty, horsemanship. Currently, it was only at level 1. However, under the enhancement of the title of the strongest scholar, it directly enjoyed the effects of level 2 horsemanship. For a beginner, this performance was very impressive. Li Shui secretly curled her lips. Beauty Li's horsemanship was at level 2, which was a genuine level 2. It was different from Bai Xiaowen's horsemanship. This was because Beauty Li was a close combat profession. She had 35 points of dexterity, and her body coordination and flexibility were quite high. She grasped the horsemanship faster than Bai Xiaowen. However, Cecilia only praised Bai Xiaowen's improvement. She completely ignored Beauty Li's excellent performance. The horsemen following behind the 3 of them were elites selected from the knights under the 2 families. Every one of them was an elite. Suddenly, behind the forest in the northeast, a yellow firework soared into the sky. There's a situation in the 3rd team. They've encountered the enemy's reconnaissance team. Let's go! Bai Xiaowen took the lead, and the group galloped in the direction of the yellow firework. In the open area behind the forest, more than 10 human horsemen fought and retreated at the same time, dealing with the enemy. Their opponent was a team of troll cavalry. The mounts of the giant demon cavalry were very special. They weren't horses, nor were they wolves commonly seen among the beastmen. Instead, they were velociraptors. Velociraptors were like miniature versions of Tyrannosaurus rex. Their forelimbs were short, while their hind limbs and tail were thick and strong. Like humans, they only relied on their 2 legs to run. However, their speed was very fast, and their mouths were filled with fine sharp teeth. It was obvious that they were not gentle herbivores. It was important to note that velociraptors weren't classified as dragon-type creatures. They were completely different from the other pseudo-dragons and drakes. Their racial classification was wild beast species and terrestrial beasts. The velociraptor's bloodline was closer to that of dinosaurs, and not the dragons of Western fantasy. There were only 7 giant demon cavalrymen. But their individual strength was there for all to see. Even though the human cavalrymen outnumbered them by more than half, they still weren't a match for them. They could only flee as they fought. Hold on. We have already sent out the signal. Reinforcements will arrive soon. He was one of Cecilia's knights and the captain of this small scouting team. Roar, 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 a troll with green Mohican-style hair and a blood-red spear in his hand suddenly pulled out a lasso from his waist. He spun it around a few times and suddenly threw it, wrapping it around the neck of a human cavalryman. With a forceful pull, the troll was sent flying backward. Immediately afterwards, the green-haired Mohican troll stabbed with his spear, accurately hitting the middle of the human cavalryman's back and killing him. The green-haired Mohican troll did a somersault in the air as if he was performing acrobatics. He sat back on his velociraptor mount with a smug smile on his green face. Roar! Roar, roar! The other giant demons cheered at the skill displayed in this bloody scene of slaughter. Suddenly, the sound of hurried hooves sounded from behind the mountain forest like raindrops. Enemy reinforcements. These humans have reinforcements. The giant demon cavalryman shouted loudly in the language of the survivors. Of course, in the ears of the humans, it was just meaningless shouting. The green-haired Mohican troll's smile immediately vanished. He listened attentively and then sneered, "Don't panic, it's just a small group of cavalrymen. The more human heads I cut off, the more I can show my bravery in front of Father. This is a good opportunity." As the sound of hooves approached, dozens of cavalrymen divided into two groups to outflank them. Cecilia and Li Shi were both dressed in martial attire. Their cloaks fluttered in the wind, revealing their beautiful figures on the galloping warhorses. Women? The green-haired Mohican troll stared blankly for a moment before nodding with a satisfied smile. Good prey. Take them back and make them my slaves. Listen well, these two women must be captured alive. Yes. The other 6 giant demon cavalrymen didn't feel the slightest bit nervous about being surrounded and laughed heartily. Although I don't understand what you're talking about, your expressions can easily make people angry. Bai Xiaowen appeared from the front on his horse and stabilized the defeated 3rd Reconnaissance Team. He immediately used insight, and the target was the green-haired Mohican troll. Tertius, leader level 6, race, humanoid/giant demon, occupation, velociraptor hunter commander, attributes, strength 35, agility 49, physique 30, spirit 19, skills, lasso strike, prancing charge, blood-burst assassination. Cecilia, leave this troll commander to me. Bai Xiaowen specially said before shouting. Charlotte, come here. Fortunately, he didn't call her by the wrong name. If he had called her Shi, it would have been exposed. At this moment, the two groups of cavalrymen had already converged. Li Shi agreed and urged his horse to charge at the green-haired Mohican troll, Tertius. The 6 trolls tried to stop her, but Cecilia drew her bow and knocked an arrow. A blazing white light flashed, and the arrow whistled through the air, piercing through the back of a troll knight's neck. The powerful kinetic energy sent the troll's body flying high into the air. It spun a few dozen times on the ground before coming to a stop, completely motionless. Lord Cecilia's skill, Snipe, activated. Vital attack, instant kill. The remaining 5 elite giant demons all felt a trace of fear. With this valiant long-range archer, how could they dare to expose their backs? Without waiting for the green-haired Mohican troll Tertius's order, he directly turned his velociraptor's head and charged at Cecilia. Bai Xiaowen's eyes flashed with surprise. Cecilia's strength was stronger than she had estimated. Of course, this was also because Bai Xiaowen had withdrawn from the battlefield to set up an ambush during the vanguard battle and hadn't seen Cecilia's battle. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so surprised. But this was a good thing. Thinking that Cecilia's devotion to her had already reached the level of moved, Bai Xiaowen felt a burst of happiness in her heart. Now that the Wrathclaw had been killed and couldn't be resurrected for the time being, having such a valiant storyline character by her side undoubtedly strengthened the strength of Bai Xiaowen's side. On the other side, Troll leader Tertius had also determined that Bai Xiaowen was the commander and immediately activated prancing charge. The velociraptor under him jumped forward, and its speed increased sharply. Prancing charge had 2 enhancements compared to ordinary charge. First, it increased the probability of dodging, making it harder for the enemy's blocking spells and shots to hit. Second, it could ignore some obstacles in the terrain. Bai Xiaowen, who was dressed in a lord's attire, waited silently. It wasn't until Tertius accelerated to its maximum speed that he suddenly urged his horse to dodge and activated his skill at the same time. Eat my overlord's color, an awe-inspiring pressure spread out, and Tertius instantly fell into a 4-second fear state. The other troll warriors were also controlled. 2 troll warriors with less than 13 points of mental strength, Bai Xiaowen's mental strength had reached 39 points after leveling up, were even hit and stunned. After being controlled, Tertius couldn't adjust his angle and couldn't brake. He could only watch helplessly as he charged forward until he was dozens of meters away before his fear state disappeared. He suddenly pulled the velociraptor's reins, and his entire body leaned back violently. Only then did he stop the forward momentum. However, at this moment, Bai Xiaowen had already summoned the elite stitched monster, Fatty Boy. It threw out its iron chain and pierced Tertius' shoulder blade, dragging him with force. With Bai Xiaowen's bonus, the level 4 Fatty Boy had 21 points of strength. Although it couldn't compare to Tertius's 35 points of strength, Tertius was currently in an unbalanced state. Meat Hook's drag judgment succeeded. Tertius was pulled over and drew a large arc in the air. He was about to fall heavily to the ground. However, Tertius' attributes were indeed strong enough to suppress Fatty Boy in all aspects. During the latter part of his flight, he adjusted his posture in the air. Gripping the blood-red spear tightly, he aimed it at Bai Xiaowen, who was beside Fatty Boy, and thrust the spear forward. Given Tertius's frightening agility, which was close to 50 points, Bai Xiaowen simply had no chance to dodge. He did not expect Tertius to be able to turn the tables on him. Thus, he was struck by the spear. Success! Tertius's heart flashed with joy. However, when the spear pierced him, Tertius felt that something was amiss. Bai Xiaowen, who had taken the spear attack, showed no change in his expression. He simply reined in his horse and retreated. If Tertius was an awaken, he would have received a prompt from the battle log. Bai Xiaowen's HP had only been reduced by 28 points. On the bodies of Bai Xiaowen and Fatty Suture, there was a faint red line that was almost invisible to the naked eye. This was the special effect of Bai Xiaowen's profession LVL4, life sharing. Originally, the damage from Tertius' spear attack was as high as 67 points. However, 39 points of damage had been shared by Fatty Boy. Bai Xiaowen and Fatty Boy's HP were maintained at the same ratio, close to 90%. They were quite safe. Li Shi jumped down from his horse and stabbed forward with both swords. Both Shi and Tertius were agility-type warriors. They used speed to fight speed. Most of the attacks were blocked by the blood-red spear, and the damage caused was not high. Bai Xiaowen summoned 3 skeletal swordsmen to help Li Shi defend. After not having to worry about defending or dodging, Li Shi's attacking efficiency had increased significantly. The 2 passive skills were stacked at the same time. Moreover, every critical hit added a layer of Mark of Thunder to Tertius's body. The Shadow Assassin appeared behind Tertius and unleashed its assassination skill, causing double damage to a vital point. It also added a heavy bleeding effect. Tertius roared in pain and swung the blood spear's long pole backward, sending the Shadow Assassin flying. Li Shi then activated Dance of Devil Fire, greatly increasing his damage. Soon, he had accumulated 5 critical hits. Li Shi chose to detonate the Mark of Thunder in his next attack. His Dagger of Sanctions drew a bloody cross. What was originally an ordinary skill left 2 deep wounds on Tertius's body. The wounds were so deep that the bones could be seen. Tertius's HP dropped by more than 70 points under this attack. It was terrifying. Bai Xiaowen calculated that Li Shi's Dagger of Sanctions, plus the additional fire damage from 2 Dance of Devil Fire, should only cause 30 points of initial damage under the damage reduction of the boss armor. In this way, the detonation of 5 layers of Mark of Thunder actually added up to 40 points of additional damage. Although they had temporarily lost the main damage output of the Wrath Claw, Bai Xiaowen and Li Shi had leveled up to level 4. To a certain extent, their strength had undergone a qualitative change. The overall damage output of the team had increased instead of decreased. Of course, the inability to use the Wrath Claw's howl and suppress skills was indeed a huge loss to the team. But no matter what, at least dealing with an agility-type level 6 boss like Tertius was not a problem. In his moment of despair, Tertius raised his spear and stabbed at Li Shi. He used the overpowered skill Blood Explosion Assassination, intending to change to another one. As the leader, his Blood Explosion Assassination was more powerful than the other elite troll warriors. The damage was calculated according to the lost HP. There was no need to deduct additional HP. Moreover, it was rather abrupt to use. However, Bai Xiaowen had already prepared a follow-up move. The last skeleton swordsman was summoned through the fixed-point airdrop skill. It appeared in the path of Tertius's attack and blocked it for a moment. The shadow assassin pounced out in time and knocked Li Shi away, taking on the follow-up damage of this attack. With a loud bang, Li Shi detonated the accumulated fire energy of the Dance of Devil Fire and blasted Tertius to death. This level 6 leader had only killed one of Bai Xiaowen's skeleton swordsmen at best. As for the shadow assassin, it had relied on the passive racial ability of the Body of Nothingness to reduce physical damage by 50% to survive the Blood Explosion Assassination. I feel that we have indeed become stronger. If the Wrath Claw was also here, it should be easier to fight. We won't even lose a single skeleton soldier, Li Shi said with a smile. Bai Xiaowen nodded. Now that we are intermediate hunters, compared to primary hunters, the improvement of our strength is inevitable. On the other side, Cecilia led the reconnaissance team and captured the remaining 5 troll warriors alive. Their HP had been reduced to less than 10 points. Li Shi looked at Cecilia with new eyes. She wasn't surprised to be able to kill these 5 giant demon warriors, but capturing them alive was much more difficult than killing them. These giant demons were extremely wild and worshipped honor. They were all tough bones that would rather die than surrender. Bai Xiaowen put away the golden treasure chest and joined Cecilia. Chapter 284. Cecilia was very curious. How would Bai Xiaowen extract information when there was a language barrier? But in the next second, she saw 4 magic cards flickering in Bai Xiaowen's palm. Bai Xiaowen quickly chose a yellow magic card and threw it at an elite troll warrior. The enemy's strength is 0. 667, 1. The success rate of the Charm of Confusion is that the target is seriously injured. The success rate of the Charm of Confusion is increased. The Charm of Confusion has failed. The target will be stunned for 5 seconds. Bai Xiaowen shook his head and sighed. Li Shi raised his sword and chopped off the troll's head. What's wrong? Cecilia didn't understand. The first target has failed. I need to rest for a while and prepare for the next spell, Bai Xiaowen explained briefly. The failure rate of the Charm of Confusion would only increase even if he continued to try. Anyway, there were still 4 elite troll warriors as test subjects. He might as well kill them directly. After waiting for 9 minutes, Bai Xiaowen cast the second Charm of Confusion. Unfortunately, it still failed. Li Shi swung his sword again and killed the second troll warrior. The third attempt was also a failure. Seeing the third troll's head fall to the ground, Cecilia couldn't help but ask, "Are you okay, Dior? I don't think the success rate of your spell is high. Do you want to bring the remaining 2 captives back to Blackrock Fortress and find a way to interrogate a scholar who can speak the language of the survivors?" Cecilia said this while holding back her laughter. It was the first time she saw Bai Xiaowen's unlucky face after consecutive failures. In addition, she said this not because she couldn't bear to kill the captives, but because she was worried that if all the captives were killed, this contact battle would be in vain and they wouldn't be able to get any useful information. Although Cecilia also knew that even a scholar who understood the language of the survivors might not be able to get any useful information, at least it was more reliable than Bai Xiaowen's spell. Next, Bai Xiaowen cast a bewitching charm on the fourth troll. This time, it actually succeeded. Li Shi swung his sword out of habit. Hey, wait a minute. Bai Xiaowen quickly stopped her. Did you succeed? Cecilia came over with interest. Yes, it worked. Let me look through his memories. Although I can only get some fragmented information, it's better than nothing. Bai Xiaowen closed his eyes and activated the telepathy ability of the mental link to communicate with the troll soldier. So this is the language of the survivors? The sounds that sounded like chanting were actually ancient Latin words. Moreover, the sentence patterns and some of the catchphrases in the language of the survivors are really a bit strange. The language of the survivors was actually derived from ancient Latin, which had the same origin as the common language of the Kane continent. For example, it was like the relationship between a dialect in the south of Huaxia and Mandarin. The words were all the same, but when spoken, they had two different pronunciations. Through the reading and digestion of the super brain, Bai Xiaowen quickly grasped the essence of the language of the survivors. From the head of the confused troll captive, he got some information about the main force of the allied forces of the survivors. However, after the bewitching charm was successful, only scattered memory fragments were left in the target's head, and the information was not very complete. Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and let the troll soldier stand behind him. Seeing the troll soldier's obedience to Bai Xiaowen, Cecilia's blue eyes widened. Is this the effect of witchcraft? So magical? Will he answer whatever you ask him? Bai Xiaowen nodded slightly. That's true, but there's no need to ask. I've already looked through the information he knows. Although I got some valuable information, the information is still relatively fragmented. I'll try the last one. Li Shi whispered, Your witchcraft, can't you only control one target at a time? I know. For the last one, I don't intend to use witchcraft. I learned the language of the survivors from the fourth troll's head, and I can use it to interrogate the last guy. In fact, after witnessing Bai Xiaowen kill 3 of his clansmen in succession and use evil witchcraft to control his only remaining comrade, the 5th troll soldiers will have collapsed. He would answer whatever Bai Xiaowen asked. It seemed that the survivors of the troll clan were not all stubborn. Bai Xiaowen did not believe all of it. While asking, he verified it with the memory fragments in the 4th troll soldier's head. The final verification result was very reassuring, and the 5th troll soldier did not lie. After a while of conversation, Bai Xiaowen waved his hand and ordered his knights to tie up the troll soldier and escort him back. What information did you get? Cecilia asked. Li Shi also cast a curious look. Bai Xiaowen took out a military map of the northern frontier and began to sketch on it. His expression was very serious. The situation is more serious than I thought. The scale of the allied forces of the survivors is very large, and there are many types of soldiers that have never appeared in the vanguard army. Bai Xiaowen took a breath and said, Their main forces are only a day's journey away from the Black Rock defense line. Bai Xiaowen took out a piece of parchment and sketched the images of various types of soldiers on it. There were trolls riding raptors, archers flying at low altitudes, dark-skinned and agile warriors, and huge beasts that could release terrible lightning. At the end of each type of soldier, Bai Xiaowen also marked the approximate number of soldiers. His drawing skills are very good. It's as if he's alive, Cecilia praised softly. At first, Cecilia looked at Bai Xiaowen's drawing with appreciation, but after seeing the number of soldiers marked at the end, her expression gradually became dignified. This scale. Is it true? In this case, the allied forces of the survivors are more than twice as many as us in terms of numbers. As a general in the front line, Cecilia certainly knew that the individual combat effectiveness of humans and the survivors could not be compared. Now that they were suppressed in number, how could they fight? It's not necessarily a bad thing to have a large number of enemies. Bai Xiaowen quickly put away the parchment and mounted his horse. This shows that their supply pressure is very great. Let's go back to Black Rock City and report this information to His Highness. Chapter 285. The next day was also the fourth day since Bai Xiaowen accepted the second main mission, the Flames of War of the Black Lava Nation. Early morning. The big bell on the city wall was rung, and in the distant horizon, a black army appeared, accompanied by wild horns and desolate drum beats. Prince Nicholas stood on the city wall, his brows furrowed like a statue. Beside him was Archbishop Arlo, whose brows were also furrowed. The other commanders of the human army also came to the city wall. Exclamations rose one after another. As the distance narrowed, the magnificent military appearance of the Allied forces in the distance also appeared in the vision of many high-level members of the Human Alliance army. A group of trolls riding velociraptors acted as the vanguard, leaping forward. This was the troll and velociraptor hunter troop, followed by a phalanx of other troop types. A phalanx of orcs riding huge wolves moved forward in an orderly manner. The elite wolf cavalry of the orcs. Someone recognized them. After the cavalry was the infantry. These infantry were all dark-skinned, with slender and sharp ears. They had the characteristics of elves, but the style of their clothing was mainly dark, especially the females. In the cold wind of the northern frontier, they actually exposed a large part of their dark skin, with only a few thin pieces of cloth at the key points. They were really not afraid of the cold. The Dark Elves Scimitar Warriors, there are actually a total of 4,000 people. The one who spoke was Count Denton. In the middle of the Dark Elves phalanx, there were also the figures of huge creatures. These were giant lizard-shaped beasts, with thick jade-like skin, and a single horn on their protruding noses. Giant thunder beasts. Oh my god, with these giant beasts, it's enough to make up for the lack of magic of the barbarians. Nicholas' magic advisor sighed. These flying soldiers of the remnant army were all slender and small, and most of them were female, with eagle-like wings growing on their backs. In their slender hands, they held short bows, and the arrowheads shone with a cold light. Harpy archers. Damn it, since when did Sin Domain have so many birdmen? These feathered beasts can really give birth. Another old northern frontier feudal lord recognized the flying unit's origin. Each phalanx composed of elite soldiers of remnant people left a wave of exclamations on the city wall of Blackrock Fortress. Seeing the terrifying number of the Allied forces, and then associating it with their combat effectiveness, most of the nobles in the Human Alliance army felt a deep fear. A few days ago, the scene at the ball was recalled from many people's memories. Many people used their eyes to look for the figure of the young lord who dared to speak the truth but was ridiculed by the group. Before they could find him, a dull drumbeat sounded. A tall orc riding a giant wolf stepped out from the formation of the orc wolf riders. The orc's body was extremely thick and burly. He spoke in the common language of the Cane Plain, ancient Latin. Perhaps it was because of his poor grammar, but he spoke very slowly. He spoke word by word, like a hammer hitting an anvil, clearly spreading across the entire battlefield. I, Absalom Herslet, chief of the Orc clans, commander of the Allied forces. Human, surrender. Live on as a slave. Resist, massacre the city. On the city wall, although they had been awed by the Allied forces of the remnant people, many humans still cursed loudly. Prince Nicholas raised his big hand wrapped in armor and stopped the cursing of the crowd. He said slowly, "Orcs, with me here, Black Rock City will never fall. Don't talk nonsense, speak with your sword." The chief of the Orcs, Absalom, commander of the Allied forces, showed an indescribable smile on his fangs protruding face. Attack! This shout was shouted in the language of the remnant people. In the phalanx of the remnant people, the originally desolate drum beats suddenly became hurried, and a feeling of excitement rose from the bottom of their hearts. Countless remnant soldiers waved their weapons and roared as they rushed to the city wall of Blackrock Fortress. After entering the range of the city wall and arrow towers, they were greeted with a torrential rain of arrows. Although the remnant soldiers were all elites and had strong combat power, they would still die if they were shot by multiple arrows. The phalanx of orcs with spears was at the forefront of the charge. However, the trench around Blackrock City made this group of orcs spend twice the time and pay more casualties before they rushed to the bottom of the city wall. A large number of orcs lay at the base of the city wall. The orcs behind them jumped on their comrades with extraordinary agility and built a human ladder. Soon, 3 or 4 layers of human ladder were stacked and they approached the edge of the tall city wall. These orcs were exposed to the range of the archers of the human allied forces on both sides of the arrow towers and became live targets. The archers of the human allied forces shot a rain of arrows behind the orcs and formed a pincer attack with the human defenders on the city wall. One by one, the orcs fell. This defensive formation with the arrow towers and the city wall at each other's corners is indeed very valuable in actual combat. On the city wall, Count Denton saw this scene and said to Prince Nicholas. Prince Nicholas nodded. If the orc commander is not stupid, he should not continue to stupidly attack the city wall like this. Sure enough, in the remnant camp, a bugle horn sounded. Immediately, elite soldiers such as troll headhunters and troll swift dragon riders rushed to the arrow towers and tried to climb them. However, the difficulty of climbing the arrow towers was the same as climbing the city wall. They also had to bear the baptism of arrows from the city wall. Soon, under each arrow tower, there were high piles of corpses, just like around the city wall. The raging orc vanguard began to hack at the arrow towers with the weapons in their hands. After all, the arrow towers were temporarily built. Although they were also made of black rock, they were not as thick as the city wall. With a knife here and a hammer there, the remnant army paid a large number of casualties and the arrow towers began to crumble. We can't sit back and watch them demolish the arrow towers. Your Highness, please allow me to lead the charge. Count Denton cried. Nicholas shook his head slowly but firmly. Everyone was stunned. These newly built arrow towers have played a big role. In order to destroy one arrow tower, the enemy has to pay at least dozens of soldiers' lives. It's already quite worth it. Prince Nicholas said. According to Dior's opinion, as the defenders of the city, we should try not to rush out of the city and fight with the powerful enemy. I don't think this is a good time to charge. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.